And hello, and welcome to tonight's episode of Reading the Receipts. We've got a ton to get through. It is incredibly busy. So we're going to move pretty quickly. I'm also going to do something a little different this week. I'm not necessarily going to go through all of the motions in super fine detail because we got so much to get through. Most of tonight, what I want to focus on is, I think I called this one How to Gaslight. I wanted to kind of focus on the gaslighting that's been happening in the court documents and kind of show how some of the wheels are starting to fall off of all of this. So hello to chat. Hello, everybody. Hi, Kim. Hi, Justine. Hi, All Scientists, Subtle Murder, RS, Karen, Vander V, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Great to have you all tonight. So as always, we're going to start out with our disclaimer. We're going to look at some legal documents, but I am not a lawyer. I'm certainly not your lawyer, and this is not legal advice. All of the allegations we're going to cover tonight are just that. They're allegations. Nothing has been proven in a court of law. Nothing we're going to talk about should be taken as fact. This is all just opinion provided for entertainment purposes. All right, so with that, like I said, we got a lot to jump in. Let me know if I'm a little too loud. That looks a little hot, but let me know. Jones's reply to Abel is genuinely hilarious if anyone hasn't read it yet. Yes, I'm going to try and get through everything because I do want to get to Jones's responses and motions to dismiss because they are hilarious, but that's going to come at the end. If we don't get enough time tonight, I might have to do that as a second part. But that does bring up where we're going to start tonight because I do want to talk a little bit about it because what we have got from Jones's motions to dismiss in her case is confirmation about the subpoena. Right? There's been a lot of talk about how did they get these text messages? Were they obtained legally? Were they not? Today, there have been a number of press reports from Jones where she has provided the subpoena to different press outlets. She has not put them into her legal filings, so we have not seen the subpoena. But Page Six reported that they had gotten hold of a copy and showed that it does show that she was legally obligated to provide those text messages and ordered by a court. Deadline also had a copy of it. They talk about it as well. And I think in here somewhere, yeah, they say it was dated October 2024. And then the Daily Mail goes even further, saying that they got a copy and that it was sent to Jones by Marriott, Phelps, and Phillips, who are the attorneys representing Lively in her lawsuits. So it looks like there was a subpoena from Lively's lawyers in October for all of the text messages that were used. Now, don't know how that subpoena was obtained, right? Was this some sort of pre-litigation discovery and they were able to get a subpoena that way? Is there a lawsuit that was attached to this? We don't know. We just know that there is a subpoena, apparently. So, obviously, things are not going great right now in Win World. They are coping pretty hard, arguing that maybe this was some lawyer who was junior and tricked into writing a subpoena, that even if they did get a subpoena, somehow it still means that she shouldn't have shared the text messages with the New York Times. Like, it's not a good day to be a Justin Baldoni fan today right now. They are coping pretty hard with this. Was part of their foundation, right? Was that all of these text messages were obtained illegally and therefore all of this is poison fruit and, you know, these court cases can't work, even though that's not how this works in a civil trial. They were really counting on, oh, all of these text messages are going to get dismissed. Well, bad news, I'm afraid. All right, so where I want to start tonight, we're going to be bouncing around through a lot of the court cases. And one of the things I realized this week in talking about this stuff on threads and about, you know, the motion to dismiss in this case and the motion to dismiss in this case, and you're like, hang on, wait, they'd already filed a motion to dismiss. What's going on here? Was that, there's still a little bit of confusion about all of these court cases, what is going on. So I kind of wanted to go a little bit back to basics because as we dig into Jed Wallace's case and the motion to dismiss Lively has in there, some of these pieces are going to come up. So we're going to go back to basics, talk about the different lawsuits, what happened, and hopefully that will help clarify like where all these different motions to dismiss are coming from and all the rest of the stuff. I don't know why several lawyers would lie about this. It doesn't matter. The messages are legitimate. Yeah, me neither, Kim. And I saw today that some of the big legal creators are still doing that and speculating about this, and then also bringing up the, well, you know, if this was a criminal trial, it would be dropped and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, but it's not, right? It reminds me of the oh God, I can't remember his name, Gino, the famous clip of Gino, right, where he says, you know, if my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bicycle. Like, yes, if something was different, it would be different, but that's not what this is. Love the graphic. Yes, I try and like to explain things with graphics. Jung Farm says, I think they should have been sanctioned just for saying that he could have sued California lawyer, so that too, California judge. Yeah, I don't know. It's so wild they thought they could count on the poison fruit thing. Sure, that's a huge wild ass bet. Justine, 100%, right? Wilkie Farr and Gallagher are a decent law firm, right? They're not going to put their entire reputation on, being involved in this case on, a case that was frivolous. So that they are involved tells you that they think there is a very good basis for this case and that they are going to win. But anyway, okay, so all of this gets kicked off, right, when Blake Lively files a complaint with the CRD, or a right to sue petition with the CRD on December 20th. This is what kicks the whole thing off. This is then what the New York Times report on December 21st, and this was her putting out her complaint and getting that right to sue, but it was not itself like a formal lawsuit. It was her filing with the CRD to then get permission to be able to sue and all the rest of it. So in response, and she was suing basically Baldoni, Heath, Sarowitz, and Wayfarer. She was suing Melissa Nathan and her company, the Tag Agency, the agency group, Jennifer Abel and her PR agency, RWA. It Ends With Us LLC, which is the LLC that Wayfarer created for the movie, and then also Jed Wallace and Street Relations. I'll talk about why it's important that we know like who's in what when we get later into the other motions to dismiss. So in response, 11 days later, Wayfarer then sues the New York Times for defamation, right? This outrageous article that planted all these lies. And so they represented essentially everybody that Lively had named. So the same parties, right? So Baldoni, Heath, and Sarowitz, Wayfarer, Melissa Nathan, and Tag, Jennifer Abel, and RWA. It Ends With Us LLC, and Street Relations, and Jed Wallace. And they all sue the New York Times. Now, on the same day, Lively then turned her CRD request for a lawsuit into an actual lawsuit, and she filed that in New York, and it was her versus basically everybody except she dropped Jed Wallace and Street Relations and also RWA. So you can see here, those are no longer on there. In response, a couple of weeks later, Baldoni then also files in New York. They file and they sue Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, Leslie Sloan, who is Blake Lively's publicist, and Leslie's PR company, Vision PR. And they represent everybody except they drop Tag RWA, and they don't represent Jed Wallace and Street Relations, right? So you can see the different list of people here. Looking at how many people on Justin's side is insane. Yes, Aris, and we're going to get into that later because Baldoni and Friedman are starting to feel the pain of representing, was it 10, representing 10 different entities as their legal representation in one firm. It's a lot. And they've been complaining about that this week. So then Lively files her amended complaint. I think, is that right? I don't think that's right, February 18th. I think I got that wrong. I might be right. February 18th. Yeah, it might be right. And it's Lively versus everybody, again, that she had in the CRD complaint, right? So bringing back Jed Wallace and Street Relations, but RWA are still left out of it. Baldoni amended his complaint first and filed his amended complaint. And what he did was when he amended it, he added in the New York Times. So again, it's everybody on their side, and then they add in the New York Times versus 5. What's happened is because those are both filed in New York, everything's been consolidated. So the one case, the main case that we were talking about when we talk about this case is the Lively versus Wayfarer Studios case, and then the Wayfarer Studios versus Lively. And that is, as you can see at the bottom here, this mismatch, right? The 10 defendants on one side, Baldoni, Heath, Sarowitz, Wayfarer. It Ends With Us LLC, Melissa Nathan and Tag, Jennifer Abel, and then Jed Wallace and Street Relations. And they are going after, Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, New York Times, Leslie Sloan, and Vision. So the main case are those people, okay? It must be awkward for Jennifer Abel and Baldoni to be working together considering those texts. Like, oh, yes. And especially given that they've already given their answers saying that those texts were legit. Like, she really did say those things. That's uncomfortable conversation that your PR, the woman you have paid for the last 4 years, $25,000 a month, to say nice things about you, cannot manage that. To be fair though, I don't think 25 grand a month I would be saying nice things about Baldoni either. I think you'd have to really up that for me to say good things. Okay, now there isn't just that case. There are two other cases. So when we talk about this other stuff, and I think this is where there's some confusion, is there are two other cases that are ongoing. One that we just talked about there is Jones versus Abel. So this is um, while um, while Jennifer Abel was doing PR for Wayfarer, she was doing it while working at Jones Works, which is run by Stephanie Jones. So part of all of this going on was that she was doing this whole stuff behind their back, and she was planning to leave Jones Works and steal clients and confidential documents. And so there's a lawsuit there going on between the two of them, where her former boss, Stephanie Jones, is suing Abel, Nathan, Baldoni, and Wayfarer for engaging in this conspiracy to steal confidential information, steal clients, and breach the contract. At the same time, Jed Wallace filed his own lawsuit against Just Blake Lively over in Texas. Um, and he's suing her for defamation for what was printed in the New York Times article and for the CID complaint itself, stating that it's defamation to allege that he was part of the smear campaign because he wasn't. So in all of those cases, there are moves to respond to motions, and right now we're at this phase where there's a lot of these motions to dismiss, where parties on either side get to argue that this lawsuit doesn't even have any merit to be brought. And so I'm going to show you that even if everything they're saying is true, there's no legal means of remedy or claim here for remedy that would survive this. What did I bring this back up for? Oh, yes, I wanted the other one, not this one. So what I mean in this is, because this consolidated lawsuit here at the bottom of all of these parties, Wayfarer is suing Blake Lively and her parties, and Blake Lively is suing Wayfarer and their parties, right? When you're suing them like that, they both get a chance to say, hey, respond to it and either answer the questions or dismiss, or answer the allegations or dismiss. Right now, we've gone through the whole procedure where Blake Lively's side have all moved to dismiss themselves or dismiss various claims from Wayfarer's suit, but Wayfarer didn't move to dismiss them from Blake Lively's and the rest because they've just gone ahead and answered them. In these other two suits, we're still going through those motions to dismiss, the people who are on the defense side. So, all right, that is what we're doing. So hopefully that clears up. I will try as we go through this to point out which particular case we are talking about as we talk about the various pieces in it. Let me just quickly check chat. Obi-Wan Kenobi says, pretty bad. He begs people to say nice things and they talk about how awful he is in private. Right? I mean, Kim says, after 2 weeks of dodging service. Yes, and that is where we're going to start, I believe. Are we going to start there? No, we're not. We're going to start on the Blake Lively case. We'll get there in a second. All Scientist says, I'm wondering if they're going to regret trying to say that Jones Works is liable for Abel's actions. If they win that Jones Works insurance, get to find Abel a new lawyer and press for settlement. That I don't know. I don't know. Interesting. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is Jed Wallace has filed for a motion to dismiss in Blake Lively's case, right? So this is, you can see here at the top, Blake Lively versus the entire world. And Wallace has filed his motion to dismiss, and I believe this is his final piece, the motion in support. So Lively's already countered, and then Wallace is coming back with his final argument to close out his motion to dismiss. So where are we going now? So basically he kind of repeats bits that he's saying that, look, Lively's not really alleged when and where and how the conspiracy was formed. I don't know if that holds up, because I think we're pretty clear that, he was brought in around August, and that the actual social media campaign was started on the 7th, and then they enacted it on the 8th, and there's the email saying, hey, get Jed up to speed. But he is kind of relying heavily on you can't really tell me what exactly I did. And they don't really know exactly. None of us, I think, know exactly what Jed's role is and how he's participated. So, he's kind of pulling out that. And then he goes back to, and we talked about this last week, relying on his affidavit. He's really kind of pulling on this. As part of his filing, he included an affidavit where basically he swore under oath, I absolutely didn't do any of these things. I didn't post anything. I didn't tell anybody to post. I was not part of a smear campaign. Pinky promise. Therefore, you have to dismiss this case. Now, the problem is his motion to dismiss has to assume that the allegations from Lively are true and argue basically the legal basis. he's really kind of coming back to this and saying, no, you do have to, uphold my affidavit as true, and kind of cites, what he thinks is the case for, you know, why you should take it as true. That you don't have to take the pleadings as true if there's enough external evidence refuting it, and I'm like, I don't know if that counts. This is where we're starting to get into like some of the legal stuff that is well beyond me as not being a lawyer. I don't know. But what is interesting is he kind of comes across and says, look, you're not saying what specifically I did. He's saying I didn't actually post or do anything. I didn't direct or ask anyone to post. And Wallace specifically forswears that there was no social combat or social manipulation plan, or that, I should be more clear, is not a service he provided related to anything else. But what's interesting is right after that, he says, even setting aside his affidavit, right, that I didn't do any of this, he's saying that basically her complaint is an allegation that Tag hired Wallace to design and implement, not that Wallace actually did design or implement anything. This goes back to basically Wayfarer's argument from the very beginning that, yeah, sure, we totally hired a PR crisis firm. We totally talked about planning to destroy Blake Lively. We totally came up with a plan to destroy Blake Lively. We put in the plan that we specifically wanted to destroy Blake Lively, and we also talked about afterwards, oh look, our plan to destroy Blake Lively seems to be destroying Blake Lively, but we didn't actually enact that plan. Wallace seems to be taking the same argument that, sure, I might have been asked to design and implement a plan, but I didn't do it. And he's relying then on his declaration in his affidavit to basically say, and I've also said under oath that I didn't do it, so therefore dismiss this. I don't know how convincing that is, but I guess we'll see. Subtle Murder says he's claiming he's not involved, but there are text messages talking about him and his efforts on Reddit. Yeah, and we talked about this last week, right? This was Lively's response to his motion to dismiss. So it doesn't matter what Wallace claims. His declaration that he was not involved, Pinky's promise, doesn't matter because the people who hired him have text messages where they say, wow, Jed's doing a really good job of controlling the narrative like we hired him to do. So, like, the people paying him thought he was doing this. I definitely think there's enough there to survive, to at least to me. I don't know. Again, like, this is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. But it would seem to me there's enough there to survive to say, hey, look, to find out his extent and his role in this smear campaign is going to take discovery. This needs to proceed. But I don't know. And maybe Jed Wallace's legal team have found a way to get out of lawsuits. You just pinky promise you didn't do it, and then you can never be charged with anything. I think it's great. Going on to 13, he does kind of say that, look, again, they don't really explain how Wallace joined in or what exactly he did, and as he says in his declaration, I didn't do any of it. So they rely pretty heavily on it. But he also talks about how, even in Lively's own complaint, she shows that online sentiment turned negative in July. I don't think I brought this up, so let me just 1 second to bring up Lively's amended complaint. Yes, I don't actually have Lively's amended complaint in here. I thought I did. I thought at this point I had everything downloaded. Okay, and he says it's at what? 332, I think. 332. Yeah, it is 332. Okay. So he's citing this graph, right? And he's saying, look, there's this little bit of the graph here that shows negative sentiment in July. So it couldn't have been Jed Wallace. Ignoring that it takes this giant nosedive in August, right? Which is when he gets involved. Clearly something happened here, right? This is sort of in line, even in the July, it's sort of in line with what was there before. By August, however, it's very clearly something is affecting him. So again, I don't know how convincing that is from him, but that's what he's saying. So yeah, so that's it. Now I will say the one cute bit is in his conclusion. It's kind of cute. He says the Wallace parties are barely mentioned in Lively's 482 paragraph amended complaint. If this were a Hollywood movie, the critics would deem the script overwritten and the peripheral characters, Wallace and Street, underdeveloped and therefore cut from the film. Of course, no one likes to be described as a bit player or an afterthought, but the Wallace parties will get over it because this lack of attention necessarily leads to the conclusion that there is no adequate factual predicate for this court's exercise of jurisdiction, a venue of the case as to them, and should be dismissed without prejudice. So yeah, he's saying also then if not being dismissed, then it should be transferred over to his Texas case that he claimed he's already started. But if we are truly into almost happy endings, the court could reach the merits, and if it does, dismiss the claims against the Wallace parties with prejudice, meaning she wouldn't be able to refile claims. We predict the Wallace parties would like that, a cleaner storyline, and sadly for some, less attorney's fees. Given everything that's happened this week, that's not going to be the case for Wayfarer. But yes, I thought it was cute. I mean, it's nice in some of this dry language to actually have this kind of stuff. I thought this was well done. All right, let's see. The gloss over the messages, we talked about that. Junkram says, isn't he admitting to fraud? He charged them the fee, now he's saying he stole that money, right? Yes, no, I just told them that I could do a social media manipulation campaign. The coincidence is staggering. Blake Lively's decades-long career, nothing, and then all of a sudden this happens at the same time, right? It's just, who knows? Who knows? Obi-Wan Kenobi says, I want their jobs, never actually do it, get paid a ton of money. So here's the thing. He's claiming that he was just sat monitoring online sentiment. Sorry, not 25 grand, 15 grand, right? 15 grand a month is what he was getting paid to watch and sit and analyze online sentiment. I'll take that job. That sounds great. 15 grand a month just to do some Google searches, some Google trend analysis. Let's go. That's the job. The people writing these legal documents are such brilliant Hollywood writers. I think there's I'm starting to learn that lawyers like to have a little bit of fun. It's like they like to get out of that dry legal language and get some creative writing going. It's cute. It's amusing. This seems smart-ass. My hunch is it will piss off a job. Junk bomb, like at this point, right? I mean, given some of the legal filings we've seen in these cases, this is quite tame and entertaining. All right. So we also saw this week Ryan Reynolds issue his support of his motion to dismiss. So once again, Ryan Reynolds filed a motion to dismiss. Wayfarer have argued against it, and now Ryan is coming back to say, okay, these are my closing arguments for this to close this out. You know, he again is basically making the same argument that, look, they haven't really stated any valid claims against Reynolds, and you know, they're only confirming that there's three parties, Wayfarer, Heath, and Baldoni, that have articulated any legal claim against him, right, from the statements that he made to WME and their loss of their contract and any loss of earnings from that. So the vast majority of the parties in here, you know, he's saying there that every Wayfarer party other than Baldoni has brought a federal lawsuit alleging one cause of action that they may have no legal basis to assert. And this is kind of going back to the group pleading issue that we've been continually seeing in all the motions to dismiss, that they've said, you know, Ryan Reynolds did damage to everybody, and that's very clearly not the case. They've not really asserted anything, and especially in the case of like Sarowitz, you know, they don't really have anything that Ryan has done against him. So he's saying, look, you gotta get rid of this. There's no causes of action. Trying to find. Okay, he goes on to argue that, look, beyond the predator statements, they don't really argue anything from Ryan. Right? Essentially, the main point of contention is that Ryan had said to WME that Baldoni was a predator on two separate occasions. But yet they've argued that there's this conspiracy and they've worked in concert with them, including statements to third parties, but they don't actually say what these were. It says they were widely disseminated, but it doesn't plead any actual single statement or details about any such statements. So again, I mean, this is the continued problem that Wayfarer have had. They keep alleging defamation in this widespread, you know, talking to all of the different various press that Sloan did it, that Ryan did it, they all work together. And it's like, cool, tell us about any of it, please. And they can't do anything. I will say, both in this motion to dismiss and in Lively's that we're going to read in after this, if you watched last week's, and I talked about like reading legal documents, you noticed that I kind of stepped out of my comfort zone and did a little bit of legal analysis that I felt comfortable to do Um, I will say I want my JD now. I want my honorary JD because in both of their supports, they called out the very things that I had mentioned last week. So if you remember, Wayfarer had argued that the small group exception kind of was covered them. This idea that if you defame a group, then you defame the individuals in that group if they're identifiable. And they're trying to use Ryan defaming Baldoni to then say, well, that means he defamed all of Wayfarer. And I was like, hold up, that's the exact opposite of the small group. Ryan's response here calls that out. They said their attempt to meet this requirement through a small group exception fails because this requires allegations about a defined group. So this would require Ryan to make defamation claims about Wayfarer, not about Justin Baldoni. And it was a very obvious move that they were trying to make. So I feel justified. I feel justified that I called that out last week. And like I say, I think now that just means that I'm an honorary liar. I think that's what that means. I think if you do one piece of analysis on YouTube, they just send you your license through the mail. So yeah, I'll be taking the bar next week. I don't know which bar, but we'll take something. So obtain text timing. Where was that? Oh, okay. So then they talk on about, well, look, Ryan made these claims with having all this extra information. And they also talk about, well, look, there's this conspiracy where Ryan Reynolds got a hold of the communications between the Wayfarer parties and Stephanie Jones that disproved the claims that the Wayfarer parties had orchestrated a smear campaign. So Ryan couldn't have made these comments in good faith because when he was saying that Baldoni was a predator, they'd got hold of these text messages from, Abel's phone and everything and could see that Wayfarer were totally innocent of a smear campaign. The problem of this, and he points this out here, is it's nonsensical. They don't allege anywhere that Ryan had access to the materials at the time. They're claiming that Ryan made these statements in July, but they didn't get the text messages and everything until August 21st, which was a month later. So you can't claim he had all these text messages to know that Baldoni wasn't a predator if he got those messages a month after he made the statements. But they also haven't actually shown that those materials did go to Ryan. They haven't shown that Ryan had them. And that's what he says here. They don't allege that they had access to the materials, nor at the time that he made the statements. And there's also the huge problem that, as we've seen from those text messages, those materials don't actually disprove the smear campaign. They very much reinforce that happened. So yes, the unfollowing. I wonder how they haven't filed a Rule 11 motion yet. I'm not sure what you're talking about specifically, Kim, if you're talking specifically about the Exhibit A, because they do talk about that not being in there as part of Rule 11's evidence submission. I can't remember if it's in his or in hers. I don't know if we'll get to that. Yeah. And that's the other thing, is the unfollowing was 10 months before. So this is the other problem with this. Baldoni only noticed in May, but it happened like 10 months before. So yeah, Ryan doesn't need the text messages. He has his wife coming home from set telling him every day. Exactly. She knew what she was going through. And also he was present at those meetings, right? He was present at the January 4th meeting when they discussed the 17 provisions. So yeah, I mean, it seems very reasonable that even if you're going to allege that Lively was doing this all to accumulate power, which is what they claim, Ryan, unless he's actually part of that conspiracy, would genuinely believe that his wife had been harassed, which is, essentially what they argue in their thing, in their support for their motion to dismiss. I did think it was interesting that he goes on to basically point out that one of the cases they cited, they use this Monex deposit, but apparently the huge issue with this is no longer like settled law. This has been disputed. And the other thing is, they keep arguing that, well, this is extortion, and they keep using cases like this where there was a demand for money, but they just asked for a public apology. So that's not really extortion, asking for a public apology. There's also a bigger problem with that, and we'll get to it when we get to Lively's response, because they talk about it and pull it out as well. He goes on to again to talk about the contract, and he points out that, look, even when they're talking about the contract, that the contract was only between Baldoni, Wayfarer, and WME. Nobody else had a part of the contract. So again, this whole group pleading problem, they point out that every other plaintiff's claim for any species of tortious interference is frivolous because they were not involved and they did not have a contract with WME. And so again, this is another reason why their original complaint is fundamentally flawed. And then finally, he wraps up by saying, look, don't give them leave to amend. Where are we? Because, you know, not only have they been complaining about they're going to amend and all the rest of the stuff, they haven't provided any indication of the substance of what their amendment's going to be. Nowhere did the Wayfarer party say what facts they could allege to cure the defects, or, and here's the important bit, why they could not have alleged those facts in either of the two prior complaints. This is going to be a bigger deal later when we get through some of the other stuff, but this is something to note as well, is everybody's going to start hammering on this, that they've been saying that they have extended information for a while. They have not amended and they haven't included that information. So what exactly do they know now that they didn't know then that they can amend to fix it? Because otherwise, if you don't have something, you're just amending based on the same information. So why didn't you include it in the first time? So that's Ryan's motion to dismiss. What are we at? 30 minutes. Okay, we're flying. We're flying. We're going good. All right, let's see. University of YouTube School of Law. Absolutely, Marcy Jinx. I will be trademarking that. And if you too would like to join the University of YouTube School of Law, let me know. I will do a bunch of graduates. What I will do though, I can't give you a law degree. What I can do though is what we'll do is if you survive all of what we're going to go through tonight, because it's a lot, and we get to kind of like the post afterwards celebration with reading out the Jones motion to dismisses, which are highly entertaining. I definitely recommend you stick around for. We will donate some memberships again. We'll drop out five memberships to the channel as well later tonight. So I can give you that. I can't give you a YouTube law degree, but I can give you a free membership. Okay. Okay. What else we got? Obi-Wan Kenobi says Baldoni has denied what Blake claimed in the 17 points. They just say how it was addressed and how that does not confirm right mistake. Yeah, and that's what we're going to get into again in Lively's complaint, right? Is this idea that, you know, fundamentally Wayfarer don't actually deny anything. They just kind of again reiterate that from a different point of view, that's what's going on. Okay. Now, if you remember from last week, Wayfarer kind of changed their tack a little bit, right? Because, you know, Lively's response was, look, you're claiming that it's defamation based off the New York Times article and the CRD complaint. But both of those are protected. The CRD complaint is protected because it's a legal complaint and it's me talking about sexual harassment, which under California law is completely protected, as is any retaliation of defamation for it, which opens them up to triple damages. But also the New York Times is only reporting on what's in the CRD complaint, and so that is also privileged and protected. So Wayfarer came back and said, but that's where you're wrong. We're not filing for defamation on either of those pieces. We're doing it only on statements that were made after July 20th. And they're doing this because, you know, at the same time as they're going through Ryan's motion to dismiss and arguments, they're trying to hammer on the defamatory statements are what Ryan said to WME in calling him a predator. And so they're basically saying, no, we're not talking about that earlier stuff, because the big problem with the earlier stuff is, as Blake Lively brought up, the origin and the kind of the genesis of those sexual harassment claims were that 17-point protection. And there's a year of time limit. I can't remember what the wording is. Somebody in chat tell me what it is. But there's a time limit for a year before, you know, when you make your claims for defamation. And so since those statements are older than a year, it is outside of the, come on chat, tell me what the phrasing is. I've forgotten it. I'm drawing a blank. We all know what it is. Anyway, it is outside of that year-long window. Somebody in chat's going to have my back and tell me what the actual phrase is. Statute of limitation. Thank you, Atticus. Good job. All right. So yeah, since it's outside of statute of limitations, so they're saying, no, it's these July 20 predator statements instead. Well, then Lively comes back and says, okay, this is like a reverse trap card on this, because they're saying, look, they have now hit a wall and they're trying to say, well, it only applies to the alleged statements from December. But if that's true, then they're saying that nothing happened before July 21st, including the production of the cut in the film, which is part of their defamation case. Remember, they're saying that no, she was trying to hold this thread of sexual harassment and going to the press, and that's how she got all of these extra pieces for the film and her editing and all this privilege. And they're saying, well, hang on, if you're now saying your entire case is based on statements after July, none of what you've been saying about her taking over the movie, taking control of the edit, none of that is the case, because that would be based off the sexual harassment allegations that were made before July, which you've held are the extortive threat that she has used in order to gain control of the movie. So this is a huge problem. And then they basically say, look, they've essentially admitted that their $400 million lawsuit's a PR stunt. It's been a bad week for Wayfarer. But they also kind of, tie themselves into knots as they talk about, the opposition's discussion on actual malice was based on entirely on the FIC's effort to dismantle the insinuations in the 17-point list, and that she, materially mischaracterized or exaggerated all of the allegations she made in the CRD complaint. But because they're arguing that they're not relying on any statements prior to July 24th, that would July 2024, it would exclude that 17-point list or the legal complaints, then they can't actually show any malice or what's going on, because that was where all of their basis for that was. They go on to basically say that their focus isn't that any of these events didn't happen, that Lively fabricated these events completely, that there was no birth video or naked video of Heath, there was no entering her trailer. They're saying no, she's just misinterpreting it, and they're saying that they're focusing on Baldoni's insistence that he acted appropriately, rather than point to any facts indicating that Lively subjectively doubted the truth of her allegations, which is the basis they need for defamation. It does not matter if Baldoni thought he was acting in good faith. If Lively genuinely believed the claims she was making and the fear of sexual harassment and the uncomfortableness around it, then her claims are legitimate. They're not defamatory. So, yeah. I love the opening sentence of the second paragraph. Lively's lawyers have had enough of Freeman's bullshit. Yeah, they do not understand the implications of their own concessions. This has been the week for basically, I think, everybody letting Freeman have both barrels. We're going to go through this. We're going to take a little meander through Blake Lively's motion to dismiss in the Jed Wallace case. We're going to come back to Lively's case. And when we do, if you are a fan of seeing lots of legal snark and Brian Friedman being embarrassed by his own words, stick around for that, because that is where it's going to get fun. But I need to kind of build this up first before we get there. So they're basically saying, look, they still haven't kind of shown that she had any bad faith, and now they're arguing that she's liable for things her husband allegedly said. In 2025, wives are not responsible for their husband's words. It is incredible that Baldoni, a person who calls himself a feminist, would take such a position. They really just stick in the knife and twist it. But the other piece that I thought was interesting for them to attack is not just that. I mean, that is a cute little pullout, but it's this, right? The whole basis of Lively's motion to dismiss was based on Section 47.1. It's a California law that is protecting making any kind of comments or reporting sexual harassment, right? Wayfarer came back and said, well, look, on its grounds, Section 47.1 is unconstitutional. They're not just arguing that Lively's use of it is inappropriate or that she's misrepresenting it. They're arguing the law itself is unconstitutional. And basically, Lively's lawyers jump on this and say, hey, he's not just coming after Lively. This whole law is to protect victims of sexual harassment and assault, and he's saying it's unconstitutional. He's going after all victims. Right? If his arguments are successful, even in the best case scenario, right, and let's say the Wayfarer are right in their interpretation, they're dismantling protections for sexual harassment and assault. Not a great look, right? Might win him the legal case, but you are not a good person. But then they point out that, look, it doesn't matter because their arguments are frivolous. But I thought that was a good attack line in basically, kind of again hammering his credibility, hammering his credentials, and really kind of twisting that knife on, you really are not the person you said you were. Yeah, what a feminist. It's bad. Sotomayor says, I love that they keep capping back using Baldoni's persona and words as an alleged feminist against him. Yeah, and the more that Friedman keeps talking to the press, the more that it keeps biting back in them. And we're going to go through more of that later. What we got? 7, 8, 3 publications. Did I get the wrong page? No, here we go. Okay. So they talk about in their new telling of the case, again, more shade, the Wayfarer parties now state that rather than the first amended complaints boiling down to 2 categories of publications, which is what they've also reiterated in their Sloan and New York Times responses to their motions to dismiss. In Lively's case, they now say, oh, no, there's 3 publications that we're holding her liable for. That Ryan talked to WME and called him a predator, that Sloan made statements to some press that Baldoni had sexually assaulted Miss Lively. This is all as a resulting of the conversation with James Vituska that we've talked about, was all happened after the CRD complaint, December 20th. It does not show that Sloan made any such allegations to the press. And again, we'll definitely get into that later. And then, that Lively, Reynolds, and Sloan's said unidentified statements to unidentified third parties that they had failed to prevent sexually inappropriate conduct towards Lively. Again, they haven't really specified any of this. And she kind of points that out. We go back now again to, them talking about Ryan Reynolds. She talks about, look, they're kind of saying that, she's making it up, but again, their own amended complaint shows that Lively had a reasonable basis. They talk about, them saying, we can bury anyone. They had HR complaints. They knew about bits and pieces of it, and talking again about, look, they're just quibbling over the characterization of events, but it doesn't undermine the fact that Lively herself believed she had a reasonable basis to make those harassment allegations and, to make a case based off it. Like, she's doing it all in what she's good faith. Again, bringing up, the message that they had said, their own text messages saying, Lively genuinely believes that she's right and all of this is unjust. They go again, as they build out their argument a little more for Baldoni's what they call Baldoni's faux feminism, arguing that a wife should be liable for her husband's statements. Fortunately, that is not the law today. But they're also pointing out that, hey, look, Ryan's statements themselves are inactionable. So, she not only the statements themselves inactionable are not defamatory, but they can't really even pull that Lively had a reasonable part in the publication. That, they say that Reynolds is her agent. And again, we talked about this last week, right? This was them bringing up their whole law about like agents, and I talked about, look, you can't just say that your husband is an agent and then just leave it at that. And she brings this up that, look, they haven't cited anything showing that Lively told him what to say, that encouraged him to say it, that she was being his representative. It ignores the fact that Reynolds had his own relationship with WME. They talk about how he had his own contract with her. So they haven't really shown anything to show that he was acting on her part. And they point out that, look, that cannot be implied from the marriage relationship alone. There are certain pieces of the marriage relationship that are protected, so it's not going to expose him legally just based off being married to her. And then again, coming to this ratified the predator statements, they don't say how she did so, how she knew or approved them in advance, or was otherwise involved in basically Ryan saying them to WME, which again is pretty bad. They also talk about, where is it? Respondent superior. There we go. Respondeat superior. Again, we talked about this last week, right? And I brought it up and I said, hey, that's an employer-employee relationship. That doesn't exist with a publicist. Just because you are paying them, you're hiring on contract to do a service, doesn't make them their employee. And yep, they call that out too. So again, I'm feeling pretty vindicated. Made some good calls last week. It will not last, probably. But feeling very smug this week to see that in there. At this point, I think, I think Lively's lawyers are just watching these YouTubes and filing their stuff based off what I'm telling them. Yeah. 100%. But it's nice. It's nice to see that validation of like their motions to dismiss were so obviously flawed, that our thinking was right that we had last week of digging into this to see, yeah, no, this is so bad that a software engineer could see the problems with it from space. I mean, that's bad. That's bad. So again, they go on and basically say, look, there's no way that she was an employee. Not only that, but Sloan is, affiliated with a separate company. So she's an employee or, employer at another company. So that alone undermines the doctrine of its application here of this employer-employee relationship. She was employed by a separate company. They go on to say, this extortion. That are saying, look, part of this extortion claim is that, there was a wrongful threat, that they're doing something and to get all of the control of the movie and all the rest of the stuff. But they point out that, look, they admit the requested apology was prompted by Lively's own belief that, in their words, Wayfarer, Baldoni, and Heath were engaging a shadow campaign against it. So again, that would be a good faith assumption, and her motives there were that she was based off that. They also talk again about the PGA mark, again using their own words from the email that he sent out saying, I'm not saying we were literally forced to acquiesce. So how is it extortion when you yourself are admitting that there was no force or coercion to do it? So is bad. But I talked about Monex in Ryan's. Lively also brings it up, but points out a problem with this case. So they're bringing up this case because they've argued a couple of times, look, how's it extortion if no money or property was ever actually gained out of this extortive threat? And they brought up Monex, where I guess it's a case where that was what happened. But it was a case in which they did demand money. So they point out that here, Wayfarer parties don't cite a single case sustaining an extortive claim where demand for property was not made, much less where no money or property was received. Instead, each of their own cases had a demand for property or money, including Monex, which involved a $20 million demand. So basically, they're pointing out that, look, we're saying we didn't get anything out of it, and they're Wayfarer pointing to these other extortive cases, but those are cases where people made a demand for something but didn't get it. That was not the case here. Not only did, Lively never demand anything, and they've never shown any threats, and I've talked about this before, that like they've repeatedly said, she made a threat here, she made a threat here, and she made a threat here. When you look at his timeline, every time he makes a claim, oh, there's a screenshot, there's a text message, screenshot, text message. Lively made a threat, no text message, no screenshot. So they're saying, look, every single time there's no threat for property or money, they did not receive any property or money. What exactly are we claiming? I didn't receive what I didn't threaten to receive. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's Schrodinger's relationship power. The person in charge is whoever's convenient at the time. 100%. Yes. And can they please make up their minds on who's the A-list power celebrity, Ryan or Blake? They keep changing who controls the other. 100%. Marcy Jinx, do you take Blake as your lawfully wedded agent? Good job. What's a Baldoni? Everyone feels like an A-lister. Oof, ouch. Okay. Where are we at now? No threat received. Okay. We're on page 18. Yes. So then she brings up the point that, look, they actually, in this breach of covenant claim where they're saying that basically Lively went above and beyond, broke her contract with them to take over the movie, they point out that, well, actually, now they're actually bringing up new facts to consider in their opposition. So in the motions to dismiss, you're meant to argue the case that is in front of you, the complaint as it is, assuming that all pieces of it are true. Wayfarer are now resorting to inject pieces of it, starting to add in bits of her contract, which should have been in the original complaint. And they argue that Lively's contract granted her the right to consult and approve on certain aspects of the film and production and marketing. And that, to terminate her performance under extremely narrow and inapplicable circumstances. And we talked about this last week, that, okay, so you're basically admitting that she had the right to, not only get involved in production, but to make decisions about the movie and to, decide whether to promote the movie or not based on the marketing and have that marketing approval. They admit that she had that as part of her contract. And that, for everybody who's asking, well, why didn't she walk away? They're also admitting that she had a very narrow circumstances under which she could terminate her contract and not be legally liable. So walking away wasn't necessarily an option for her. So they bring that up and they say, look, the new allegations fail to support the complaint. Look, Lively was contractually obligated to participate in the film's production. It's part of her contract. She was allowed to do it. That no contractual provision was frustrated, right? She didn't stop them from, making their movie. She helped and aided with it and also made them a boatload of money at the same time. 300 million is not on a 350 million on a $25 million budget is not change. It's Wayfarer's biggest film, right? No damages are alleged, no parties to the contract are identified. So, like, even them adding in these new details, which they're not allowed to do, doesn't help their case at all. I also love the fact that when they're talking about the WME contract as well, they throw shade. We talked last week about how it looks like it's a vocal contract. It doesn't actually written down. The Wayfarer parties are also silent on their failure to allege how or when Lively interfered with the Phantom contract. Who knows? Is it there? Is it not? Well, let's see who's really behind this contract. It's Old Man Johnson scaring the kids away. It's not really a WME contract. It's the janitor scaring those kids away. The fact we haven't seen a contract all the way for HR policy speaks volumes. Yes. But what's interesting is that Wayfarer do have a head of HR. So what they were doing, I don't know. If they start taking Candace's own story and start using it in their complaints, it's Alexandra. There's a lot of where they've leaned on stuff, and I'm going to talk about that, I think, a little later, because yes, they do kind of point out that they are taking, Wayfarer's team are taking internet sleuths stuff into their legal filings. Subtle murder, extremely narrow circumstances that somehow didn't involve allegations of sexual harassment. That's awful being stuck there going through that. Subtle murder, I talked about this last week. I think that's one of the things. I do think that might be one of the things, and that was why they brought it up, is Wayfarer trying to say, well, she could have got out of it because of that. But I don't know, right? Without seeing the contract, we're speculating. Why it's not attached, I don't know. Should be. So we talked about no contract on the Phantom, third buried in footnote. Oh yes, so they keep going on, this is back to the interference with the contract, right? The Phantom contract. They tend to the conclusion that somehow she's responsible for Ryan Reynolds' comments, that Wayfarer parties admit the defamation is disguised beneath their economic relationship claim, but the statements aren't themselves actionable. And they come in and say, third, buried in a footnote, the Wayfarer parties acknowledge that a duty of care is required for negligent interference, right? They added in this whole argument about, because they had this contractual relationship and Lively was an employee of the movie, she had a duty of care not to disparage Baldoni, Wayfarer, the movie, because that would interfere. And so they say that, and they say, well, hang on, they also, in that footnote, admit that the actual complaint did not address this. So now they're introducing yet another new argument that they themselves admit, oh, we forgot to add into our original complaint. And the motion, like the arguments in the motions to dismiss, is not the place to be bringing up new arguments. So they're really throwing shade on, like, they have no clue what they're arguing, and they're just throwing spaghetti at the wall here. And I love that they're calling them out and burying them for it. And then finally, we did a whole bunch of conversation. What really started my whole journey into digging into law last week was this Noah Pennington doctrine that they brought up. And I was like, if you remember from last week, if you're here last week, I was like, this is antitrust law. It's got nothing to do with this case. It's got nothing to do with defamation. It's got nothing to do with what's going on here. And yeah, and once again, we see Lively's lawyers bringing up that, look, this is a doctrine of antitrust law. The Second Circuit has not even decided if the Noah Pennington doctrine extends to non-commercial litigation. And here you are trying to attach it to a lawsuit that has nothing to do with commercial antitrust litigation. They also go on to say, look, even if it did, it wouldn't extend to the section 47.1 because that exists to protect First Amendment protected conduct, which is also what Noah Pennington is meant to protect as well. So they're like, it wouldn't apply to override section 47.1 because they're both out of that same care. But then they also go on to say that, look, even if that their argument is correct, that the treble penalties that are enacted by section 47.1 would chill defamation suits, would discourage defamation suits, that itself is outweighed again by the risk that the California legislature recognized when they put that law into place, that meritless defamation suits would chill reports about sexual harassment. So they're again twisting this knife that, look, Baldoni's trying to argue on the side of we should be allowed to file defamation cases, whereas we're saying, hey, the reason that law exists was really to put the protection around people bringing sexual harassment, not folks like Baldoni who want to bring meritless defamation cases. Just really, again, highlighting that everything he's doing here and his motivations are counter to his entire persona. All right, Macy Jinx, she did extra work for free and we made 325 million. This is extortion. It's the wildest. Not only that, but when the movie didn't, was terrible. Her cut of the movie was terrible. Her cut was, gross, and she didn't know what she was doing, and she's clueless, and she rewrote the scenes, and this movie's a bomb, and it made 325 million. Okay. The junk fund, but in reality, the production was insured. If Lively walked, that's why they have a completion bond. They would have not lost a dime. Yeah, and like Sony's obviously got some sort of contract with Wayfarer, right? Lively would not have been able to have that level of control and do that without Sony having creative input, which is why her saying that she wasn't making her cut, she was making Sony's cut, makes a ton of sense. Lol, Friedman does not want to talk about duty account when it comes to Abel. Yes. It totally wrecks their case with Abel and Jones Works. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ryan did have a contract. Blake didn't have to accept harassment. Yeah, didn't have a contract. Blake didn't have to accept harassment. What it is. Yeah, none of this makes a lot of sense. So we will see. Wayfarer only put up 20 million. They received the additional 5 million from another studio, Columbia, to bring on Blake Lively. That's probably why she felt she had a wider budget deluxe. Interesting, because I had seen a news press article from I can't remember if it was Deadline or Rolling Stone. I can't remember which of the two articles it was that had talked to people, I think in like July, and they had said that there was like definitely like Lively was chilled and really not involved and just was kind of showing up and didn't really like the production, and that she was having more say in it, and they said that it was because she was financing the film. And I've never seen anything about that, so I don't know if like this is part of the stuff that will come out down the road, is that she put some money into this and that was part of the reason why she felt she had more control, or if that was just a crew member totally misunderstanding the situation. We'll see. Hey, at least people know who he is now. That is definitely true. He has definitely got a lot of fan. Getting shout outs from jail, no less. Even Harvey Weinstein knows who Justin Baldoni is now, so I guess he has that going for him. So again, I just thought that was interesting that they called out the Noah Pennington and agreed with a lot of what we said last week. So yay us. Okay. So now I kind of want to get into, we're going to jump over to the Jed Wallace case over in Texas. So I talked about, really wanted to kind of focus this episode on like a lot of the gaslighting that's been happened. I'm not really going to go through a ton of this motion to dismiss. Instead, I'm going to talk about some of the details that it revealed. So this, if you heard about the 800-page complaint from Blake Lively, this is the document that you probably heard about this week, the 800 pages. It's not 800 pages, right? It is 35, 36 on the extended. The rules in Texas are much shorter for your motion to dismiss. I think it's 20 pages. So Lively did have to file, hey, can I file extended pages? Wallace's team didn't dispute it, so it was uncontested when it went through. Nobody had a problem with her filing 35 pages. The 800 pages comes from all of the exhibits she attached to this, which is where we get a ton of new information that I want to cover because it starts to show the story falling apart. And like I said, I don't necessarily want to go through too much of the motion to dismiss in here. but we'll run through it quickly and then we'll talk about the exhibits. All right. Yes, Justin Baldoni fans are getting confused. Read the pages saying that Jed responded with only 14. Yeah, and you know, Jed's original case in this case was also a ton of pages because he had like the CRD complaint in here twice. So that's like 400 pages. Then he had like 20 pages of an you know, an Elle magazine article or something. 15. It's a web article and it's like 15 pages, like because like it's got the footer on a separate page. Like, what is going on here? And they had no problem. They had no problem with his original complaint. Like I said, what was his complaint? His complaint was 10 pages, and then you know it's got the CRD complaint. Oh, it only had the cover sheet for it. I guess the version that I saw had it in here twice with the precursor, and that was 81 pages. So, like, it was a lot that he filed there originally, 100 plus pages, but nobody had an issue with that. Lively files all of these exhibits, and everybody loses their mind. But it's what it is. Okay, so Lively opens up by basically saying, look, the entire case that Wallace is filing here in Texas is a complete sham. We'll talk about why that is in a minute. But, you know, that he's brought this case in Texas separate from what's going on in New York. And that, but, you know, look, in their own words, right, they were talking about discussing this plan and doing the rest of it. And, you know, she's talked about this. The other issue is that, you know, he's arguing defamation based off the CRD complaint, but it's all in a standard format. It's all legal, a legal complaint. It's all protected as a legal complaint. You can't really, you know, sue for defamation on that. And Shaz here, like, it caused some confusion with, you know, what conduct they were suing for because everybody's listed on the CRD complaint. And this was part of what he was arguing was, you know, that she put all the defendants on one side and then argued the complaints on the causes on the other side, and so you don't know who was, you know, guilty of what, and so people would assume that he was responsible for sexual harassment or something. This is the standard format of filing. Arguing that this is problematic or causing issues for you is wild. So yeah, he was not getting that. So anyway, what did I want to talk about? CRD complaint on page 18. I think it was this. Now, let me see. Right. So they talk here about, like, look, when we filed the CRD complaint, that they filed it on December the 20th with get an immediate right to sue, and they sent a letter of the form and a cease and desist letter to Wallace, who shared it with the attorney Brian Friedman, who was counsel for Wallace. And they bring up that the next day, several press outlets reported on the CRD complaint, but leading the race was TMZ. I thought this was a beautiful little nod because if you remember, made a video very early on, and I talked about how it looks like when Friedman got that original CRD complaint, the first thing he did was leak both it and his statement to TMZ, which is why there was like a dozen press outlets who reported on all of this before the New York Times ever did. And they did so because Brian Friedman had tipped them off and leaked this to her. So this is the first time I've seen an acknowledgement of them calling that out. And then to also talk about, look, it included the defamatory statement from Friedman. They're also calling out Friedman's statement as defamatory. And I talked about in threads about how I think that's a hat tip, letting Friedman know that there might be further action coming along the lines because of that. Yes, like an hour or so after TMZ reporting on it. Yeah, I think they talked about they got it at like 2:16. They sent out Friedman's reply at like 2:16 a.m. and TMZ were working on it at like 2:09, like 5 minutes, or like might be the other way around. It might be like 5 minutes after he sent it out. But like within 10-15 minutes of Friedman sending his statement to the New York Times, TMZ were writing their article, which included his statement. So there's nowhere else he could have got it. They could have got it from. So, yeah. I even watched everything streamed by this bastard. Interesting. Where do we go from there? Leading the rest was TMZ. We talked about that. I think that was shots fired. But the big piece about this is really they give more story. And we talked a couple of times about there's been some shenanigans with all of the Wallace stuff. And we talked, I think we've seen evidence before them talking about Wallace was kind of refusing service. We got a ton more details on that. And that's really what I want to spend some time talking about, right? Of Wallace had tried to evade service. So I talked originally about when we brought up the different lawsuits. Let me go back to that for a second. When Lively had her original complaint, it had Wallace. When she brought the actual lawsuit against everybody in New York, Wallace had been dropped. Instead, her legal team was filing against Wallace a pre-suit deposition. So they weren't including him in the lawsuit, but they had filed this pre-suit deposition to basically go ask him a bunch of questions, find out what he knows, find out the extent of his role, right? So they tried to serve him with this, and he kept dodging it. And they include the sworn statements of the process servers along with this. This is one of the process servers, and they talk about, this is Kelly Mirsky talking about, they showed up on the 22nd, the property was gated, they couldn't get a hold of him, they tried honking their car, they called and texted his number, but didn't receive anything back. They came back the next day and did it again, and they got a text message from this number. When you Google for this number, it is Jed Wallace's number. You can see, contact Jed Wallace at this number, contact Jed Wallace this number. It is all over Google that this is his number, right? All of these people that he represents and is the agent for, all included on their web pages at the bottom. That hey, if you wanna contact this guy, here's Jed Wallace, here's his phone number. So this phone number is Jed Wallace's phone number, and it stated Jed Wallace is represented by counsel, the law firm Liner Friedman, Tatelman and Cooley, which is Friedman's law firm that he's part of, will accept service for him. Do not try to serve him again. The process agent texted back and said, asked for their name. They texted back, Tamar. I apologize, but I don't know how to pronounce that. I will leave it at Tamar. I don't want to try and murder that. But one of the lawyers at Friedman's law firm. And they said, yes, they are aware we received the letter. So they were pretending to be Tamar. They also then include the email exchange that then resulted. So this was what? They tried to serve him on the 22nd, on the 24th, we get this. Okay. So the 24th then, Laura Prada tries to reach out and says, hey, we're told that you're representing Jed Wallace and you've agreed to accept service on his behalf. Can we send this to you and you'll accept service on his behalf so we don't have to serve him personally? Friedman immediately responds back and says, nope, my office never agreed to accept service of process from anything. Haven't spoken to anybody, don't know who you guys are, what's this about, kind of thing. Laura replies and says, look, I'm surprised by your email because your associate, Tamar, copied on this email, is the person who reached out to the process server and indicated your firm would accept service of process. So they are under the impression that it was Tamar who reached out to them, but it's not, it's Jed Wallace who was saying that it was Tamar. We confirmed this again with the process server yesterday. The process server indicated that Tamar claims to have sent an email to me, but today no email has been received. So, they're trying to push back and say, well, we responded and they didn't. Again, Friedman then responds and says, okay, I do think we will accept service on behalf of Jed. I'm waiting for Jed's lawyer. So now we're on the 25th and they're saying, yes, we'll probably accept service for them. The 27th, Laura follows up and says, hey, circling back on this, what's the update? And then Friedman says, I'm unaware we agreed to accept service. We're not accepting service. Somebody else will reach out to you on the 25th. The 25th, they try again to service him. They get nowhere with it. I'm going to read out, there was a second process server who tried to serve him. I'm going to read it out. I'm not putting it up on the screen because there's his address in there and I don't really want to show it off. It is public information, but I don't want to necessarily blast it everywhere. But they tried to serve him again on the 27th. The property gated, there is no call box, no vehicles presence, could see lights on throughout the house, and I did see someone moving inside the home, but wouldn't accept service. On the 28th, attempted service again, still unable to gain access to the property. There were no vehicles and no movement around the house. On the 30th, they attempted service again. Gate was still closed. No no vehicles visible. Honked a couple of times and left my calling card on the gate when I did not receive a response. Came back on the 1st of February. Attempted service again. Still unable to gain access. Did notice that my calling card had been removed as I was entering my notes. A neighbor stopped by and asked me who or what I was looking for. I informed them that I have a delivery for Jed Wallace, and they confirmed that Mr. Wallace does live at the address, but he travels and is rarely home. So for like, what, over a week, I think almost 2 weeks, right? Like a week and a half, he was dodging service. Oops, you showed his address. Oh well. Dodging service for all of this. So they bring that up in here. That, you know, they were trying to serve him. In the meantime, right, Wallace served his own lawsuit against Lively on February the 4th. So he spent the better part of a week and a half trying to dodge being served for this pre-suit deposition, then in turn turned around and sued Lively. Now, the other piece that we learned from this, and we talked about this last week, was that he had moved the registration of his company. And he did that on February the 5th. So he filed this lawsuit saying, no, actually, this should be based out of Texas. Then he had a company that was registered in California doing work for Melissa Nathan that he said was in California, doing work that in his own complaint he admitted felt the impact of it in California. He then changed his California company and re-registered it in Texas instead. And when he did so, you have to put on like your company who's going to be your registered agent, right? If the company gets served with legal notices, who does that go to? All this kind of stuff. The name and address they put on there for that was the address of Friedman's law firm. So you've got this whole situation where for a week and a half, Friedman is going back and forth on, I will, I won't, I maybe will accept service for Jed, I don't know. Ultimately says he's not going to. And then a couple of days later, Friedman's law office is named as the process server for Jed Wallace's company as he puts it in Texas. So he's changing his company, incorporating in Texas, but still saying this California lawyer is going to accept service on his behalf, having spent the last week saying that that isn't going to happen and he's not going to accept service on behalf of Friedman. Like, it's wild that they have been allowed to obstruct in this way and delay, right? So I say all of this because a big part of Wallace's whole motion to dismiss is he argues for this first filed, right? That he filed his Texas case before Lively added him through amendment to the New York case. Lively saying, no, look, my case is the first filed because of the CRD complaint and the original New York complaint that I filed. Just because you were not named on it doesn't make it not first filed. We were trying to serve you, you were ducking it. This is why we ended up just putting you on here, because we wanted to go through this and just do you as a deposition. Now you're on the full lawsuit fully. All right, the other piece in here that they included in here is they talk about the pretrial conference. I don't remember what the thing for bringing it up in here for. Exhibit, no? I don't remember why they brought it up in here. Trying to think. Go back to yeah, they bring it up here. XC. Let me see if I can bring it up. Find out why. I forget why they brought it up in here. Yeah. Okay, here we go. 13. What was the reason they bring it up here? Okay, so yeah, they bring it up in here because of them talking about they never agreed service, and no, that's J, not K. K is the transcripts. Let me go back. There we go. Okay, so this is all part of their first file doctrine. They're talking about when they come to doing the pretrial conference, the reason why Friedman moved his case that he had originally filed. Let me bring that up. Remember, I told you this was going to get complicated. Friedman's first case here, the New York Times complaint, was against California. Right, when he filed, he then moved he then filed it in New York, dropped the California case against the New York Times, and in the amendment brought that then against New York Times and consolidated it on January 31st, right? So in the pre-trial conference, he was saying that, look, the reason I'm doing this is because it makes no sense to be doing this on different coasts and have different coasts, consolidate everything, bring everybody together, which is basically what Lively's saying she's doing by adding Jed into that New York case as well. So this makes this the first filed case, not what Jed's doing. Now they entered into the motions into it, their exhibit, this conference that happened on February 3rd. Yeah, February 3rd pre-trial conference. There's a ton of stuff in here. So that's what we're going to cover and go on for a little bit, and then we'll kind of wrap up and do the other stuff I wanted to get to. Every time I hear Jed's name, I think of the Beverly Hillbillies theme song. Yes. So this was really important because I don't think we've seen this transcript before, and there's a ton in here that really changes some of the stuff that we know about, and I thought this was really interesting. Okay, so the big piece is page 9. This whole pre-trial conference was to them to figure out what their case management plan was, to agree upon dates of when are we going to get this done, when we get this done, all the rest of the stuff, do we think we can meet those dates? That's going to become really important because something else happened this week where Wayfarer got their tushes handed to them. But this conversation was basically, look, when do you think we can have everything done? What are we agreeing to, the schedule, all the rest of the stuff? Immediately they start out a little hot on Lively's side because they're talking about, look, with regards to the schedule, we don't think the schedule we submitted is workable because we conferred on January 30th and we agreed on a schedule, right? We've conferred, we agreed on a schedule, great. The very next day, the Wayfarer parties filed their amended complaint. They did not tell anybody in that meet and confer that they were going to do that. That's important because as part of that meet and confer, Lively's lawyers did say that. Lively's lawyers did say, hey, the original date for everything to be wrapped up with motions to dismiss and stuff is going to be March, I think, 5th. We're going to push it to April 18th because we do expect that we're going to amend. We're going to add Wallace. They say we're going to add a party, but basically they knew at that time that they were going to add Wallace to their complaint. So we want to push the date out so we can get this. Wayfarer said, cool, yeah, great, sounds good. We're not going to fight that. Didn't argue anything for it. When they filed the motion with the court, they didn't oppose it. The next day, they amended their complaint to add a new defendant and didn't talk about it. And then obviously added in the 168-page timeline as well, and including new title. So they did this, and then of course everyone's scrambling, going, "Oh crap! Now we have to respond to this. Now we have to figure out are the dates going to still work." And so Lively's lawyers are admittedly upset here. That basically in the meet and confer, Friedman is once again not sharing information, not negotiating in good faith, and that happened. I don't remember if we knew that already or not. But anyway, that said, Friedman comes back and says, sure, they're going to do all this stuff, but we want to kind of get moving with stuff. Friedman basically says, look, the reason we added the New York Times in was to make it simpler to get everybody in one place. But we think, notwithstanding the other team amending, we can totally meet the deadlines. This is going to get important later, promise you. We can totally meet the deadlines as they are. We don't foresee any problems. If everything tracks out as we're looking, we agree we can meet the April 18th deadlines. If anybody who's been watching the complaints knows, this is going to get, this is where things fall off for Wayfarer. The other thing that was interesting in here is they then talk about the New York Times on Friedman's side. And he basically, this is what I was saying about he's getting his information from the internet sleaze, saying that, oh, you know, the New York Times, we're suing them for promissory fraud, breach of implied fact, based on information we have recently received regarding the metadata of when the New York Times was involved. So remember, this is the whole thing that kind of blew up on TikTok where they talked about, oh, the metadata shows they were working on the article in October. And October is just the dates on a JavaScript folder. It's not metadata. It's got nothing to do with the article, but they're running with it. And no doubt that will pick up steam again now that we know that the Subpoena was in October as well, right? Oh, look, see, proves that the New York Times was working out in October. Doesn't prove anything. And the fact that they're relying on TikTok sleuths and a JavaScript folder name to make factual allegations is hilarious. And it shows that they don't have any evidence or information about when Lively did involve the New York Times or was starting to talk to her. Because if they're doing it based off that JavaScript folder, they have nothing. So yes. So if you're wondering, do they actually have evidence for any of this stuff? Nope. They are relying on TikTok, which is not terribly good legal strategy. And if you are paying hundreds of dollars an hour, you would probably want them to be putting in a better case than this. The reason this is included is because Lively's including this quote here, where they're talking about, look, we just made no sense to be doing this on different coasts and to kind of consolidate this. And then again on like page, was it 27? Friedman talks about, hey, we're happy to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to make sure those documents produce timely. We're not delaying this in any way. It might require more effort on our side, but Your Honor, we are going to do everything to, work with the schedule. April 18th is totally going to happen. Yeah, where was it? I just saw there, foreshadowing is a literary device. Yeah, that's foreshadowing right there. Friedman saying April 18th, totally fine. We can totally meet April 18th. I did think that was interesting in here is when they start talking to Leslie Sloan, they bring her on the call to kind of talk. So they're bringing all of the lawyers in to talk and make sure that they can all meet this schedule. Are they all good? Are you going to plan to dismiss? What are you doing? We're just going over like what the case management is for it. When Leslie Sloan comes on, where is this? Trying to find it. Is it page 29 or 30? It says page 30. I said it was on page 30. Okay. So Sloan's lawyers come in and they're talking about it because, they're trying to lay out the information. They're talking about, yes, we're going to, talking about the stay of motion on discovery that they wanted to put up. And they say basically, look, we're going to put forward our motion to dismiss first because we want the court to be able to see our motion to dismiss, to see how strong it is before we kind of put out the motion for stay of discovery. So we want you to see, we think we've got a compelling case for dismissal. That will increase basically, hopefully, the likelihood of you agreeing to a stay of discovery because the strength of that. That didn't work out, right? They put in that stay for discovery, but it got denied by Lyman, right? Wayfarer opposed it and Lyman struck it down and said, no, you've got to start producing discovery before you get an answer on the motion to dismiss. Anyway, I just thought as they're talking about that, they said, look, one of the things we contemplate, because we believe it inherently unfair for our client and her, female-run company to have to be dragged into this significant and very expensive discovery in this case when we don't contend they have any viable legal claims against her. So they're saying, look, it's unfair for us to be asked to do all this production of discovery when we feel the motion to dismiss is going to show we have no business being in this suit in the first place. But they specifically call out female run. And I say this because how many times have we seen Wayfarer immediately scramble to just like Uno reverse anything that's thrown at them? Because then they bring on the counsel on the other side for, I believe, Abel. In the Jones versus Abel case, right? On page 34. Here you go. Brian Friedman here on behalf of Jennifer Abel, which is also a woman-owned company. Like every time somebody does something, Friedman's only move is to just Uno reverse and do it as well. Along with Melissa Nathan's Tag the Agency group. So I thought that was amusing to call out in here. 36. They do also, I think we've talked a lot in the motions to dismiss about getting rid of that timeline. They talk about it in here, how it's completely improperly pled. They're raising claims in the timeline which they cannot argue against. And it's creating this narrative, this factual narrative, oh, they do this, they do that, but there's no way for them to challenge them, right? In the complaints themselves, they respond to each of the paragraphs of the complaint to say, it's true, it's not true, don't know. They can't do that against the timeline because of how it's improperly pled and put in there. And Friedman basically goes on to say, look, the purpose of putting that is so that we can put all our evidence out there, which is going to make discovery even because we're not hiding anything. And then he basically goes on to say, well, look, we can go just roll that into in the body of the complaint instead. So he's again basically saying our complaint was inefficiently pled. We have to use the exhibit to add in all this extra stuff, and that we want to amend our complaint to put this back in. So even like February 3rd, 4th, or whatever, 3rd, they were arguing that, hey, we can just amend and put this in. But they'd already at this point blown their one choice for amendment because they'd added the New York Times. The timeline provides so much bad faith evidence on why. I love the timeline though. The timeline gave us so much evidence against them. It proved so much of their case against them. I'm so grateful they put it out there. I realize Gottlieb's arguments here, and I've seen a lot of lawyers saying, look, it's totally inappropriate. It should never been in there. I'm grateful for it because we've made so much and got so much out of the text messages that they've shown us, especially like, Melissa Nathan talking to Sarah Nathan, and Sarah Nathan saying, what's this about you talking to the Daily Mail? And like, oh, I don't know. And, like, they admitted so much in there. It's really, really bad. So, I mean, hey, at least to give Lively's lawyers a good place to go look, to go get stuff. The other thing they talk about here is Lively's deposition. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a whole news story about how Lively did not want Brian Friedman to take her deposition, right? His lawyers filed a letter to the court saying this, and they were saying that, the Lively parties indicated they objected to Brian Friedman personally taking her deposition based on some unspecified statements made by Friedman, and that, she doesn't get to decide who's taking her deposition and all of this stuff. They brought that up, and so they're bringing this up in the meet and confer, and, Gottlieb's kind of Lyman kind of brings that up to them about the deposition, and Gottlieb says, no, look, the reason we brought it up was because as we're adding parties, we know we're adding parties. They've just added the New York Times to this. We know that other people are going to want to depose Lively. Friedman just sort of announced in the middle of the meet and confer that he wanted to take Lively's deposition tomorrow from now to an eternity, or some claims like that. And, Lyman's like, I don't think that's going to happen. He's not going to be able to do that, but you don't get to choose who takes your deposition. And this is probably on some comments that were made in meet and confer, about like, we don't want him to take it because he's already been making defamatory statements, and there's a potential that Friedman himself will have to recuse himself or become a witness to the case, and so that's probably why. But then they said, hey, look, we just think the discussions are entirely premature, and that that was not the point we're trying to make in the meet and confer. We want Friedman to take Lively's deposition blind without the documents. That's great. If he doesn't want to wait for discovery and all the rest of the stuff and then take her deposition, the problem is there are other parties who want to participate in the deposition. And so we don't want to do this more than once. We want to wait till all the parties are joined, everything's been amended, then we can do the depositions, because, they're going to try and add Wallace, and Wallace will presumably want to depose Lively as well, or at least his lawyers will. So yes, I thought that was interesting. And then the other piece is, again, you like the Friedman shade. I thought it was, yeah, they're talking about, look, Gottlieb's bringing up back about Friedman engaging in all of this conduct where he's talking to the press, making extrajudicial statements. They call it out and say, look, we really want a provision to say, all of the lawyers need to behave ethically and in their conduct, right? And that he's been saying all of these things to it. Lyman basically comes out and says, yep, totally, we're going to do that. And then Friedman jumps in. Where am I? Oh, this is near, Friedman jumps in near the end. Okay. To basically kind of say he needs to tone it down. And Lyman's like, I'm going to agree. Friedman kind of comes back and says, well, look, they're doing the same thing. I can't try and find where he picks up. They bring up, look, these are the type of things he's saying to the Megyn Kelly show, where, he's saying that if Blake Lively was harassed, she shouldn't have returned to the film. It's very clear what's being planted, trying to say that she's put it out, that Blake Lively's no victim, she took over the film, she used allegations, and they're trying to say, look, he's making factual claims about pieces that are, in dispute in the case. And so he's saying, look, he's making statements that are beyond what they're alleging in their lawsuit. This shouldn't be allowed and should be shut down. Come on. Where's Friedman? Oh, where was the piece about he doesn't have evidence? So Friedman responds and basically saying, look, sure, I've been making those statements, but what you're missing from this is that they gave it to the New York Times first, right? What is conspicuously missing from the argument that you've just heard is that for months before any filing was made, the New York Times, giving 12 hours notice, had months of working with counsel and others. And again, he's basing this off, right, TikTok sleuths, right? He says, Lyman says to him, you don't have evidence of that Gottlieb was the one talking to those statements or making the lawyer. So it's not his conduct. We're talking about the conduct of the lawyers. I understand the argument that those are the rules. You have some latitude to respond to the New York Times argument, but it only gets you so far. He says, I agree with you, but the point is that they've used the press and the New York Times used lawyers to make sure that what they're doing is appropriate and above board. And he says, that's a disputed issue. He says, well, I think it's a disputed issue, but we know it to be a fact. What ends up being facts are the things that either the jury finds as facts or the court finds as facts. It's not a party's assertion that something happens to be a fact. That's not how courts of law works. And basically smacks him down again. So I think this is like the third or fourth time that we've seen Lyman just really be sick of Friedman. You're going to see more of that in a little bit. He goes on to where's page 60? They go back and forth a little bit, but what I loved is this piece where Friedman goes, one final comment, not to sound like a 4-year-old fighting a 4-year-old with that they started it, but you know, in these kind of cases, once somebody says something, it becomes fact. There's no way to fight against it. And so he again brings up that, like, well, you know, they started it because, you know, they talked to the New York Times. So anyway, I say all of that to lay all of that groundwork because I talked about April 18th. Well, one of the other things that happened this week is that we already did Exhibit K. Wayfarer have come back. Is it this one? And said, look, we are struggling. They made a letter to the court. Was this April 9th? Wednesday? Wednesday. They made a letter to the court to basically say, look, we have to answer all of the interrogatories by April 14th, by Monday. And Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, and all of the Lively parties have served nearly 1,600 requests for production, 179 interrogatories, an excessive demand of discovery, to which the Wayfarer parties have been diligently preparing responses. Setting aside the obvious and troubling implication that Lively and Sloan parties do not actually know what they are looking for, the Wayfarer parties have already responded in good faith to more than 500 such requests, with hundreds of additional responses in short order, which is hilarious, given that it was Wayfarer who, in Sloan's in their response to Sloan's motion to dismiss, admitted that they didn't have evidence and that they needed discovery to go find them, and now trying to say, well, you know, the fact that Lively and Sloan are doing discovery, they don't know what they're looking for. Like, you admitted in your own motions to dismiss the oppositions to it that you didn't. But anyway, yeah, they understand. They are crashing and burning. So anyway, they asked for an extension. Basically, they want to propose a mutual extension that wouldn't be just for them, from April 14th to May 14th. They want a whole nother month to respond to any interrogatories served upon them. They asked everybody, and they say that Lively and Sloan refused to consent and provided no reason for that refusal. The Wayfarer parties also sought consent to extension of the case management plan and the scheduling orders April 18th deadline to move to amend, right? So they have until next Friday to amend their complaint. They have been talking about it for weeks in every motion to dismiss that they're going to do this. And they're saying, hey, we need more time. It's unlikely that the court will rule on all 4 pending motions by next Friday, right? So what we're saying is we would like the to amend their pleadings if the court is inclined to dismiss their claims, right? They want to move to amend. But what we'd like to do is we'd like to wait until the court decides on all the motions to dismiss and then file to amend our complaint. We want to basically get a cheat sheet. We want to see what the court's going to dismiss and why. And he's saying there, Because if we did it beforehand while the motions are still pending and without guidance from the court as to whether an amended pleading is even warranted, they're trying to suggest that, well, maybe these motions to dismiss won't succeed. They have admitted in every single one of those motions to dismiss their pleadings are deficient and they need leave to amend in every single one of them. And now they're like, an amending pleading might not even be needed. You have admitted, I think at this point, over 100 times across the 4 motions to dismiss that you need to amend. They're saying it would result in a waste of party and judicial resources. So they're saying, look, we'd like a modest extension to the deadline. That modest extension to the deadline is a date 21 days after the court's last issued ruling on the pending dismissal. So they want to wait until Lyman gives his verdict across all of the motions to dismiss, and then the last verdict, they want another 3 weeks to be allowed to file an amended complaint. Needless to say, this did not go over well. So Lyman basically said, look, I'm going to give the other parties till tomorrow to actually respond to this. What we got? Kim says, well, they don't know what they're looking for because they're basically asking what the alleged defamation statement is that we allegedly made. Yes, and this is what we're going to get into. This is where things get hilarious. So first up, we have Lively's letter, right? So Lively's letter comes back and says, the hell no, right? First off, right? And they bring up back the story of, look, when we first went through the case management plan on January the 30th, we proposed April 18th because we knew the March 5th original deadline wouldn't have worked. We were planning to amend. We asked to push it out. So we've already pushed this deadline past what was originally, because we said, hey, we know that we're gonna amend and we don't want to do an additional request, right? Wayfarer filed their amended complaint the next day. They did not wait to see, if we were going to submit motions to dismiss or any of our other answers. They didn't wait, right? They immediately amended their complaint and pushed off. They get one freebie, right? They did that without telling us. So the day after we all agreed to the schedule, they changed everything on everybody. The Wayfarer's party maneuver was executed without notice to any other party and seemingly without reason, given that the parties had conferred and agreed to an extension of the deadline for amendments in the scheduling order. There was no rush. There was no need. They already had until the April 18th to amend their complaint. We'd all agreed. Nevertheless, a few days later at that conference that we just showed, Wayfarer was saying that, hey, I think what we have agrees works, notwithstanding the amendment to the complaint. We just saw Freeman admitted that, yeah, I'm gonna be totally fine going for it. They're saying, look, the only reason schedule orders can be modified is because there was some good cause, right? And they haven't told us why. That they're being swamped with requests is not in itself a good reason. There is something they didn't foresee or something has changed and they haven't even put that down. All they've said is that, hey, we've got more stuff. The scheduling order has been in place since February the 3rd. They've known since February 11th that the Reynolds Lively party's response to the amended complaint was not due till March the 20th. They could have waited. But rather than wait for the motions to dismiss, they inexorably used their sole opportunity to amend as of on January the 31st, knowing full well that further amendment would require leave of the court. In other words, the predicament in which the Wayfarer parties now find themselves, wishing that they had drafted their amended complaint completely differently, given the arguments raised in the motion to dismiss, is the result of their own strategic decision to file an early amendment. In other words, they did this to themselves. We do not owe digging them out of their piss poor legal strategy. And I love this because it's very clear that Lively's lawyers have had enough of them. Sloan's lawyers basically use much of the same language as well, going after them. Master Jinx says working 24/7. That's what we're going to come into. They're working hard or hardly working. We're not sure. But they talk about, look, they haven't even come close to showing good cause. They the Wayfarer parties previously sought a modification of the amendment on the February the 26th, at that time seeking to file all of their oppositions on April 3rd, or what was later, which all of the defendants declined, right? So they had already tried to say, hey, we want to have all of our motions to dismiss 2 weeks after the last motion was filed, or April 3rd, whatever is later. So they wanted, again, to already try and go from this back then that, hey, we want to push things out. Yet the Wayfarer party took no actions until now, even though the current issues with the schedule were both foreseeable and their fault. And they bring up this furry puppet studio versus, I think, Fallout Boy case, which leads to the hilarious piece of Sloan's, I think, talking about the furry puppet standard, which is amazing. I love this. This is the funny part of law. Anyway, the entire premise of the request is that they should be entitled to read the court's decision on motions to dismiss before seeking leave to amend. And basically, there's no rule that says they get the cheat sheet. They don't get to kick around and waste everybody's time and wait for the court to tell them what they did wrong in order to fix it, right? Either fix it or, don't bother. It says nothing in the rules guarantees the party the right to lose a motion to dismiss before alleging all of the facts that support their claims, much less continue receiving discovery while they wait. Calling out the fact that really what this is a delaying tactic. Friedman just wants to kick this out for another month or a month and a half so that they can keep getting discovery and hope that something shows up, because they don't have anything. And we're going to see that in a second in their in the interrogatories themselves. The Wayfarer parties have already sought to leave their amend in each of their oppositions, which we talked about, to each motion, but have not identified in any of the oppositions how they would amend their pleading, much less actually attach their further amended complaint. So this is again this idea that, look, they've had since they replied to Sloan's motion to dismiss weeks ago to know that they needed to amend and fix these things, and yet at no point have they said how, what, or even attached the amended complaint to say, this is what we're going to fix it. So this idea that they know they're going to do it, they've done nothing. They've sat on their hands for weeks. There's no good reason that we could go give them another month and a half to go do what they should have already done. They're upset. They're upset. Yeah. Was it this one? Page 2. Okay, and this is the best bit when they come into here. So they're saying, look, no reason to give it to them. It's, although the Wayfarer parties harp on about the aggregate volume of requests for production, such requests are irrelevant to the deadline as to interrogatories, which are much more simple questionnaires that should be easily able to fill out. They have averaged more outbound requests per party than they have received, and in any event, the volume of discovery propounded to 8 Wayfarer parties would be predictably higher than those served on 4 Lively, Reynolds, and Sloan parties. They're saying that, yes, of course you have a large volume. You are representing 8 parties. Perhaps that was a dumb idea. And again, everybody's been saying for weeks they should have separate legal representation. Firstly, because they have a complete conflict of interest, but also it would help with having separate legal teams being able to do all of this. So Friedman turning around and saying, hey, it's too much for us. Like, you did this. Like, you took all these clients on and agreed to represent them. And you are representing 8. So of course your side is going to have to produce more and be, have more requests than the side that only has 4. Okay. It says the Wayfarer parties are dealing with a modest volume of interrogatory requests designed to guide discovery. Lively has served an aggregate of 15, Reynolds 36, Sloan have each served 64 on the Wayfarer parties. On the deadline, the Wayfarer parties will be answering no more than 24 interrogatories served by the 4 parties. They chose to sue, 5 including the New York Times. Had they not wanted to respond to interrogatories from, say, Mr. Reynolds or Ms. Sloan, they could and should have forgone filing utterly frivolous lawsuits against them. Again, you did this. You did this. You wanted to drag them into this, and now you're going to get served with requests from them. Your own complaint. Or I thought this was also nice. They said, or agreed to the Sloan party's request to stay discovery. Remember how we talked about Sloan wanted to stay discovery until after the motion to dismiss had been denied, so they wouldn't have to go through all of this. So once again, Wayfarer's own legal strategy biting them in the butt. 8 clients, money, money, money. Yes, absolutely, solo murder. Making 8 clients, billable hours. They're making a ton of money on this. Let's see what we got. I don't understand why a millionaire hasn't hired a better lawyer, says Justine. Billionaire hasn't hired a better lawyer, or at least his own lawyer, and certainly one who's not Brian Friedman talking to TMZ all the time. And then, again, Lively's lawyers bring up Friedman's own words against him. So again, talking about, well, Friedman had said they didn't give them a response Lively's lawyers come back and said, hey, look, despite claiming that the parties received no reason for their refusal to stipulate the extension, the Wayfarer parties admit that there was no discussion when they asked for positions by email. They didn't, so that's why there was no back and forth or discussion. They didn't ask for them. I assume they just told them that this is what they were going to do. But then they bring up the February 3rd meeting that we just looked at, where they said, we are happy to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to make sure those documents are produced timely and right away. We're not delaying this for a case efficiency's sake. And moving forward, we really urge the court to allow discovery to take place and take forward. Remember, when they want to depose Lively, when they want to get discovery, they're all about going as fast as we can and encouraging the court not to delay and give us discovery, give us discovery. But with getting discovery, also comes the requirement that you provide discovery. Now all of a sudden they're like, well, we don't really want to do that. We don't really want to do that. We need more time. So they bring up here the deadline interview, where, you know, again, Friedman's words come back against him. Where are we? Let's see if we can find it. You know, her fantastical claims will be swiftly debunked as discovery moves forward, easily produced with actual evidentiary proof, right? Bragging to the press about how they're going to have an easy time of providing discovery. Won't be a problem for us. We'll be able to do it. And now, you know, weeks later, they're going to the court pleading that they can't do that. So yeah, so they told them, nope, absolutely not. They shouldn't be allowed to. The fact that they are willing to make the request mutual does not entitle them to shift the schedule simply because they have decided it's to their benefit to temporarily forgo receiving discovery to avoid producing it. They're rightly calling out that what this is a strategy to avoid the deadline on Monday of them answering the interrogatories. Now, Sloan also brings up this as well, but Sloan also introduces into the exhibit an example of one of the interrogatories. And when we get into that, you'll see just how bad things are for Wayfarer. I'm going to just check chat before we get into it. I get why Friedman is doing all of this. Unless you're anyone else in the boat, he's steering into the rocks. Again, Justine, do not understand. I mean, at this point, long past, if I was part of that group, I would be wanting my own representation. Friedman cannot be representing everybody's interests. And it certainly wouldn't be in my interest as a defendant for him to be going off, popping off, talking to TMZ and Megyn Kelly. I would be absolutely no. How is Freeman repping everybody? Not a conflict of interest. I don't know if it's not a conflict of interest. I believe from what he talked about when he said about representing Friedman, or in that pre-trial conference, he said he would be fine representing other people as long as they sign a conflict of interest waiver. So it seems like there's some sort of, hey, I'm going to allow Friedman to represent me, and you kind of almost have to give up some of that conflict of interest stuff, kind of understanding that there may be times where him representing Baldoni means that it might not be in your best interest or something. It looked like there was language like that in how Friedman is like consolidating all these parties and representing them. That alone should be very alarming for the people that he's representing. I don't know like the legal boundaries of that, right? I mean, obviously he can't totally go out against your interests, right? But I don't know what the boundaries of you signing that kind of conflict of interest waiver is. But the very fact that that would be brought up would be alarm bells for me. If I'm paying all this money for a lawyer, I want to make sure he's team Brent. I don't want him to be team Abel or team Baldoni. Team Brent. Team Brent. Not going to be a problem though, because not going to need a lawyer. But anyway. Marcy Jinx, working their way to 100 million on one interrogatory at a time. Given how long it does take them to produce for this one interrogatory, absolutely. Junk Farm says because better lawyers have ethics. True. Most of them do. Heidi says there's no protection for women. This is shameful. I've got some interviews on TV that are most important. Yes, 100%. So, I was like scrolled way back. Gosh. He's trying the case in the public, hoping Blake and Ryan will settle to stop the bad PR. Yes, absolutely. This is what he does. This is how he's been doing it. And it's very clear at this point this week that this is not sustainable for him anymore. And Monday is going to be judgment day, essentially, for Wayfarer. So this is one of the interrogatories that has been served him. This is from Leslie Sloan. Baldoni has, Wayfarer basically alleged that Leslie Sloan has talked to a bunch of press. She planted bad stories about Baldoni. She talked to a bunch of journalists, but they have not said any of it. So this interrogatory is real basic. It just basically says, look, identify any person believed or known by you to have any information about anything that you've alleged in your complaint. Identify the location of documents concerning the matters that you've alleged in the complaint. Identify each person you allege Leslie Sloan communicated regarding the Wayfarer parties, right? You're going to say that Leslie Sloan, talked to all these journalists. Which journalists did I talk to? Because obviously we need to go talk to them, depose them, get evidence from them, because if they're saying that I talked to them, we need to know what they're saying and why they're saying that. Because Leslie Sloan would argue I didn't talk to them, but she needs to know who they are so they can start going through where these claims are coming from. Identify each defamatory statement that you made, right? You're claiming that she made all these defamatory statements. She said, Justin Baldoni was sexually assaulted Blake Lively. Who did I say that to? When did I say it? What did I say? Identify each of the malicious stories, right? You said that she planted stories portraying Baldoni as a sexual predator. Who did I plant them with? Which story out there says that and was planted by me, right? Identify each journalist mentioned in paragraph 233 of your amended complaint, which states that Nathan started hearing from other journalists that Sloan was planting negative stories, right? So you've already been told from journalists that Sloan was planting stories. Name them. Name those journalists. Identify each of the stories critical of Baldoni, that Baldoni was a sexual predator ahead of the film's release that were planted as part of your complaint. And then itemize and state the total damages you claim. Very simple stuff. You're putting in your complaint. She said these things to these journalists. You should have this factual information. Very interesting. They produced this to Wayfarer. I don't know if the date's on here. Yeah, it is. March 14th. A month ago. And do not have answers. This is why everyone's getting frustrated, because Wayfarer are asking for yet another month to answer basic questions such as, you say we've talked to journalists. Which journalists? And Wayfarer are like, oh, I don't know, we need 2 months to answer that. Not only has this been a bit difficult week for Baldoni's defenders, I don't know how anybody truly, right, if you're not in this to be Team Baldoni till you die, to destroy the Me Too movement, if you're just genuinely a interested party who's been watching this case, I don't know how you can't look at this and say 2 months they need to know and identify which journalists they claim Leslie Sloan talked to that they have said from months ago. It gets worse though. It always does, right? Subtle Murder says Justin planted his own stories about him being a predator by talking on his podcast in a very meeting. 100%. So we come into Leslie Sloan's letter, right? And these are basic questions, right? And so that's basically what she calls out in here and says, look, we've served 8 identical interrogatory requests on the Wayfarer parties, right? This is what Exhibit A is, identical, right, to all of the Wayfarer parties. These requests seek basic information. They were produced a month ago. The Wayfarer parties have repeatedly grandstanded in the press that they have receipts to back up their allegations and they want to try this case as quick as possible. But now faced with a rapidly approaching deadline to actually answer those claims, they can't even answer a few basic questions. For instance, the Wayfarer parties are purportedly incapable of providing information like the defamatory statements they're suing Miss Sloan for, the stories that she planted, who they say she spoke to about the Wayfarer parties, and any quantification of damages attributed to Sloan by virtue of apparently private conversations she had regarding Baldoni that were never published. They again bring up the good cause, right? Using this furry puppet studio versus Fallout Boy. And they go on to talk about, again, the furry puppet standard, which, fantastic. And they said, look, there are no circumstances which were not foreseen. Every part of this has played out as they fully were aware as of February the 3rd, when they agreed to everything and said that they were totally able to meet everything and that they would contribute to the just, speedy, and inexpensive determination of the matter. They've said, hey, that we can meet this. And they've argued this the whole time. So now they're turning around, April 9th, a couple of days before the deadline is due, to say no. They then call them out and say, look, Their inability to respond to the 8 simple interrogatories is obvious. They don't have a shred of evidence. There never was a factual basis for their invented storyline. Indeed, the Sloan parties had zero involvement in the New York Times article that the Wayfarer parties have alleged was the genesis of the entire action, which I think we already suspected, right? Because Lively had not told Sloan about much of the sexual harassment or any of the other stuff, and even told her, look, don't talk to people when Bart, her brother-in-law, kind of came out and made that public statement. She was like, I'm glad he supports me, but like, don't say anything. If you get any inquiries, just shut it down. We're not talking about this. So Sloan has kept much of this in the dark, and it talks about here. As demonstrated by the way parties on submissions, all Sloan did was respond to a press inquiry about a story that Baldoni's team planted before, which we talked about. This is the Daily Mail story that they themselves admit their own team planted a negative story about Blake Lively. Miss Sloan's complete lack of involvement in the press coverage is unsurprising, given that she did not even know about Baldoni's harassment from Lively as it happened, right? She only learned about it after the fact, so she couldn't have been pushing all these stories to the press because she didn't even know about it, and they can't show any evidence otherwise. Blake obviously got her lawyer to contact the New York Times. Sarowitz should be upset that this hasn't been settled like Friedman obviously promised it would happen. I don't know if he promised it would happen. I do think that they just thought they could carry on, push hard, and go through it. And I mean, like, this is the thing I've argued about the whole extortion claim. Every time Lively has made like a threat or kind of told her something, they've called her bluff, right? When they said, hey, we're going to boycott the movie premiere if Baldoni shows, they insisted that Baldoni was still going to go, and they created the whole to cinema, Baldoni wouldn't be on the red carpet, going to the basement. They created that whole thing. When they said, hey, give the public apology or the gloves will come off, they said, screw you, double rodsed it, and just told them to bring it on. And that's how they got here. They are here entirely because they didn't think that Blake Lively was a threat, and they did feel completely confident in basically not agreeing to her quote unquote demands. So it's strange to me that that they got themselves into this place and they're like, oh, what? Yeah, you couldn't bully her. Sorry. And huge credit to them and the law firm for keep going with this, because I'm sure there are probably days where they are all they have all had enough of all of this. The Wayfarer parties have kept the Sloan parties in this highly publicized damage litigation for 5 months based on nothing more than misinformed conjecture, bluffing, and blustering. That they have had more information about the things that the Sloan party supposedly did, but never disclosed or described what evidence they have. The Wayfarer parties can no longer rely solely on misrepresentation in their pleadings. It's time they support their claims in discovery. They then also, is it in this piece or is it later? I think it's later, right? It's later. Okay. So they're saying no, they shouldn't get any deadline extension. They don't show good faith. They got here through their own stupid, bad legal strategy and by amending. We don't think that they should be extended. And I think also, like, they don't want them to be able to amend either. They then point out that, look, if they do want to amend their complaint, they've already got ample notice of the defects. They don't need to wait for the motions to dismiss to resolve. They've already been told, right, that they have 4 motions to dismiss that carefully detail the defects in their operative pleading. And even they, in their oppositions to those motions to dismiss, consistently go, well, we can fix that. Well, we can fix that. Well, we can fix that. So you already have a ton of information to be able to go and fix your complaint. The initial and amended complaints are factually deficient in ways that should have been, or factually deficient, even worse, in ways that should have been obvious to the Wayfarers Party Council since they initiated their lawsuit 3 months ago. They're dumping so much shade on them. Like, it feels like this is months of tension and anger and upset, just frustration, just coming out and being like, hell no. Anyway, the Wayfarer parties have repeatedly represented both their filings in the press that they have obtained additional information about the Sloan party's activities that will add to their amended pleading. They did this in their opposition to the motion to dismiss. They said, we're going to amend, we've got extra information, we totally have. But Sloan actually points out, even worse, that they actually said this in the original statement they gave to the New York Times. So when Lively filed her original complaint on December 20th, New York Times released the article on December 21st, but they asked Brian Friedman, right, for that response. They asked him for his statement in response to, everything that was going on. And as part of that, Friedman said in December 21st, it was also discovered that Lively enlisted her own representative, Leslie Sloan, with Vision PR, who also represents Reynolds, to plant negative and completely fabricated and false stories with the media, even prior to any marketing had commenced for the film. Now, marketing for the film commenced in May of 2024. They don't acknowledge any defamatory statements or anything before Ryan Reynolds says the Predator comments to WME. So they're talking about May. May 5th was when Baldoni did the, kicked off the marketing. They launched the trailer. I think it was May 5th or May 6th. Did the whole pop-up with Colleen Hoover where they were making bouquets. That is when marketing commenced. So if he's saying it happened before then, they've not shown a single news story, article, or anything that anybody has said about that. It predates everything. And they said this in December. So as, where did we go? I've lost it. Yeah. So as Leslie Sloan argues here, like, if the Wayfarer parties truly had additional relevant information, and they've had it since December before they ever filed their first complaint, it's unclear why they're unable to amend their pleading by the deadline, right? They've got plenty of time. They got it. The far more plausible explanation is that they have no evidence to support their claims, and they request an extension because they hope something will turn up during discovery. Unfortunately for the Wayfarer parties, discovery will only confirm that their claims are meritless. So this is the huge problem they have, is they've said this since December, before they filed either their original complaint against the New York Times, before they filed their first complaint in New York, and before they filed their amended complaint. So they've had 3 shots at this to include the supposed information about Sloan parties planting stories, and they can't even point to a single story or a single defamatory statement that was made. So yeah, it's bad. Anyway, unsurprisingly, almost immediately the response came back from Lyman on this, and it was a no. It came back pretty quickly today. Extension of time, reply member in the support motion. I'm trying to figure out order on the motion extension of time. Lyman says no, right? It's very short and brief. Motion is denied for failure to show good cause. Essentially, you got yourself in this mess. You haven't shown how there has been something beyond your that you couldn't foresee to get here. The Wayfarer parties now been aware of what the opposing parties contend are flaws in their complaint for several weeks, and the deadline to move to amend is not until April 18th. So Lyman is again putting him on notice. They now have until Friday to leave to amend their complaint. So they've got to file a motion to say, hey, here's why you should give us leave to amend, and file it with the amended complaint, with the fixed complaint that's going to be done. I believe that the other parties, like Lively, will have then a chance to, argue why that shouldn't be allowed. I genuinely think that Lyman might give it to them, but given this and what we've seen already, I think he might be getting out of patience with Friedman too. So we'll see if they actually get that. I thought their amended complaint was going to be a slam dunk. I'm not as convinced anymore that it is, because Lyman's pretty much telling them, look, you've had weeks. You've got all of the feedback about what the flaws are, and you haven't done it. But the bigger problem is not the amended complaint. It is those interrogatories. They have until Monday to answer these. So that means they're probably working the weekend to get through some of this stuff. If they can't answer them or show this stuff, it's going to make their motion to amend their complaint incredibly difficult, because if they can't answer the interrogatories with that information, even if they fix the pleadings and how they do it, if they can't actually point to any of these defamatory statements, their whole case for arguing defamation collapses, because they can't do any of this. And if they can't do this against Leslie Sloan, then that drops her out. It drops the New York Times out. It probably drops Ryan Reynolds out, right? They're getting a much drastically smaller attack surface to go after Lively on in their amended complaint. So by not answering these well and not having definitive answers to them, they're going to really injure their motion for leave to amend the complaint, because Sloan can just turn around and say, look, they couldn't provide any of this information. Now they're giving an amended complaint where they again try to say that I defamed them, but they can't name a single journalist. They can't name a single article. It's pretty bad that they have essentially created this entire lawsuit out of nothing, argued for the last 4 months that they have all this information, and can't even provide it. So anyway, Monday's going to be super interesting. Massey Jinx says Lyman. Exactly, right? So this is a lot. Okay. I am running long, right, at 2 hours, so I do want to kind of wrap it up. So we're probably not going to get to the Jones, Wayfarer, motions to dismiss, and all of the spicy stuff in there. I will try and do a second stream for that, because I do have still quite a bit that I want to get through on this whole gaslighting thing, right? So their whole lawsuits have been brought basically frivolously and without anything to bring it up. And they've done this the whole time while also kind of completely misrepresenting and lying about what Blake Lively said. The other thing that happened this week that I wanted to talk about was the actor that played the delivery doctor, Adam Monsheen, right? He gave a whole statement to the press this week to basically say that Blake Lively's lying, right? He talked about, I'm not going to speculate as to what Lively's motivations for mentioning me in the complaint. Needless to say that my experience with working with her is very different than the one she described in her lawsuit, he says. Indeed, I was surprised to read her description of the scene. He goes on to talk about, they mentioned that, Lively's complains about him being brought on to play the OBGYN doing the delivery during the birth scene because he is a good friend of Baldoni's, that he was not hired through a talent agency, that he was just brought on as a friend. And she felt that that was very uncomfortable and distressing to have somebody in a very intimate position like that and him be there as like a friend of Baldoni's that he had a vested interest in, rather than just a random day player that they brought in to play this brief cameo. I don't believe he has any lines. You see him in a couple of shots and that's it. Like, it's just his face and that's it. Oh, my lady says, oh God, I haven't read this. Oh yes, this has been a huge thing this week. So anyway, as part of it, they talk about, Baldoni's friend, Baldoni picked his friend for this intimate role in which the actor's face and hands were in close proximity to her nearly nude genitalia for a birth scene, which was invasive and humiliating, right? Of course, you're naked from the waist down, or nearly nude from the waist down. Your feet are in stirrups. It's incredibly vulnerable position, and to have your director's best friend or very close friend, very strange and weird, especially not to have asked permission or, again, consent beforehand. So anyway, he says, well, actually, in response to her claim that she was nearly nude, her costume included a full hospital gown, black shorts, and a torso-covering prosthetic to make her appear pregnant. Monsheen further claims that the Gossip Girl never complained or expressed any discomfort at any point because nothing unusual or improper happened. It was entirely professional, he says. He goes on to then talk about how he has 10 acting credits prior to his appearance in It Ends With Us, has a master's in fine arts from UCLA, and a tour with the Tony Award-winning acting company. He said he took offense at Lively's implications in her lawsuit that he was not qualified for the role of the OBGYN. Lively's insinuations regarding my qualifications are offensive, as my bona fides are easily searchable online, Monsheen tells Page 6. Lastly, I was in fact a local hire. My wife and I are from New York and spend significant time there. As such, I, like any actor accepting that contract, was required to cover my own travel and living expenses in connection with the job. So the problem with this, and the reason I bring it up, is this is like a textbook example of what I talked about right at the beginning of all this case, of like the abusive behavior, the DAVO, the triangulation, and the gaslighting. And I realized I just threw a ton of buzzwords out there which are so overused on the internet that like everybody throws, anytime you're lying, oh, it's gaslighting, right? That's not what this is. We're not talking about lying. We're talking about a specific series of behaviors where you completely misrepresent reality and attack somebody based off that, right? So this whole idea was then, this whole article gets used and broadcast over the internet that Lively lied, she was not nearly nude, all of this stuff. She never made those claims. Not only that, but they do not address the claims she actually made in here. So if you go to her original CRD complaint, she talks about how the day of shooting, she had agreed to to do a partially nude scene. On the day of shooting, Baldoni and Heath pressured her to simulate full nudity. At no point is this ever been part of the discussion. Baldoni doesn't bring it up in any of his complaints to deny that that was the case. Weinstein here also doesn't talk about whether that was part of the discussion or whether she was coerced into this. This is where they also talk about like showing the birth video was part of that to talk about it. Baldoni insisted to Lively that women give birth naked, which is great that he's explaining to a woman who's had 4 children how women give birth. Thank you for that stunning insight. I'm sure she really appreciated the extra knowledge you're dropping there. And that his wife had ripped her clothes off during labor, so therefore all women must do that. He claimed it was not normal for women to remain in their hospital gowns while giving birth, showing that he has seen absolutely, the only births he's seen are apparently the ones involving his own wife ripping her clothes off. Anyway, Lively disagreed but felt forced into a compromise where she would be naked from the chest down. Okay. She then goes on to say that they failed to close the set. Lively was mostly nude, with her legs in stirrups and a small piece of fabric covering her genitalia. Among the non-essential persons, Sarowitz flew in for later. Again, she doesn't say he's present during the birth scene, but Baldoni, kind of sets up that fake narrative that, oh, she said he was present for the birth scene. She doesn't say he was present for the birth scene. She says he was present that day. Lively was not provided anything to cover herself with between takes. Lively was even more alarmed when Baldoni introduced his best friend to play the role of the OBGYN, when ordinarily a small role of this nature would be filled by a local actor. Lively felt the selection of Baldoni's friend for this intimate role, in which the actor's hands and face were in close proximity to her nearly nude genitalia for a birth scene, was invasive and humiliating. Now, in Baldoni's complaint, he admits this. In his 179 complaint, oop, didn't bring it up. Come on. There we go. He noticed too much. This makes my skin crawl. Heidi, it's going to get so much worse, I'm afraid. Because you think your skin crawls now, there's another detail I noticed that's going to make this worse. Sorry. I always tell, it's one of the things I always say in like my videos, it gets worse. It always gets worse. Okay, so when Baldoni talks about it in his complaint, it's 51. So he says, okay, Lively alleges that she was mostly nude with a small piece of fabric. To describe her as mostly nude is dishonest. She was wearing black briefs and a pregnancy suit that covered her midsection. So she was, other than a pair of black briefs, nude from the waist down. So he was correct. And her top was covered by a hospital gown. So again, he's admitting that her story is pretty much correct. He says her legal complaint deliberately suggests she was wearing a small piece of fabric around her generator, saying this is what generally is used, leaving the reader to believe that Lively was only wearing a small fabric. If you look at her complaint, she doesn't say that. What she does say is she would be mostly naked on top. She said generally nudity in film utilizes a small piece of fabric so that they can shoot it without, disrupting the shot, because that fabric is not able to have visible straps from profile camera angles. Now, he knows as well as I do, the reason she's saying that is because what she wore did have visible straps from profile camera angles. And I say that because if you go look at the shots of the movie, you can actually see elements of the pieces of fabric there that Lively's using. And first off, I hate all of this. I hate the fact that we are now taking these shots of Blake Lively with her legs in the air, and there have been so many news stories about it, and this is horribly invasive and disgusting, and I hate that we're doing this. So I first want to just recognize, I apologize. I apologize that we are at this stage of all of this, that we are having to dispute these lies, these obvious, very easily verifiable lies, and do this because this is horribly invasive. I know she did it in a movie, and it's a huge movie. These are brief scenes that you don't see for they're quick shots that go through. To do it like this, and this has been on all of like the news stories and stuff, I feel bad. I would not want to be in this position where literally, right? Anyway, super awkward. So that out of the way, what I will say is this. I need you to notice, if you look here, you see my cursor, right? No, you don't see my cursor. Okay, that's good to know. So I will try and zoom in as much as I can. You can see here, there is the fabric here from the lines, right? The piece of supporting fabric that is holding up what she's using. You can see it here. You can also see it here just below her belly button on this top shot here. You can see the white fabric very clearly, right? So she's wearing that pregnancy suit. You can see where, like, you know, there's this line of pink here. There's her belly, like a belly button, and there's a piece underneath it. So you can feel, you can see the pieces of it. Sorry, I'm reading Marcy Chink saying feels bad, but the truth matters. So you can see here. So she was wearing something with straps, and that's why she's calling this out here. She's not saying that she had the small piece of fabric. She's saying that that's what's typically used. She didn't use that because, you know, they used that so that it didn't have visible straps. What she wore did have visible straps, and I guess they tried to shoot around it, but you can still see that it's here. Also note, right, in Baldoni's, he says she was wearing black briefs. Monshian, however, says she was wearing black shorts. So the story's changing. What is clear from the shots that we can see here of her leg, she's not wearing anything that like, if you're talking shots, this is not shots that's coming down. It's not covering mid-thigh. It's not covering anything. You can see almost to her hip here. So this does look like she's wearing some sort of brief or something like that. And you can also see just how close Adam is to everything, right? To have somebody between your ankles in that position when you are only wearing a pair of briefs is invasive, is humiliating. They do not deal with any of that. But worse, you know, he doesn't talk about her direct allegation that he wasn't hired through a talent agency, which she talks about in her later amended complaint, or that he's a local actor. What he says is, I used to live in New York and I spend time there, and that I had to cover my own traveling and living expenses while coming from the job. So he traveled in. He was not a local actor. But yet, this whole story has been spun that Lively's lying while they are confirming details of her story, but they are lying about other pieces of it that she never said. She never, ever insinuates he's not qualified, that, you know, he doesn't have acting credentials. All she said was it was inappropriate for him to hire his best friend. Now, I said, this gets worse, right? I did say that. So this is not worse. This is just, there's more details to it. In Baldoni's complaint, he talks about this scene isn't a big deal because Lively was aware of the birthing scene. She was heavily involved in writing, rewrote it, and gave creative input for the specific scene. So he's saying, look, she shouldn't have had a problem with feeling uncomfortable for the scene because she helped to get write it. She provided creative input. She did all of these things. In his timeline, he goes even further. Let me bring it up. We said page 27. So this is where he's filming it. Now, important to note is the filming day for the birth scene was May 22nd, right? This is a week after they started filming, right? A week after they started filming. We need to keep that in mind. So a week after they start filming, they filmed the birthing scene where he talks about she was in stirrups. Lively was wearing black briefs, a pregnancy suit, and a hospital gown, which, yes, we confirmed. Seen all of that. We don't see the black briefs themselves, but, you know, we're good. He then goes on to say, she was alarmed that he had hired his best friend. His engagement was no different than the engagement of Lily's sister, who was hired, of Lively's sister, who was played, because they'd hired her as well, right? He'd also, Baldoni, hired his wife and his kids and had them playing, but they were playing small cameos, as was Lively's sister. They were not playing a role in which they were, like, intimate with somebody. And he knows that this scene's different because they closed the set. So he knows that, like, this is an intimate scene. There's bits of it. I don't know if I'm in the right one. I thought this was the piece. I guess it's in his amended complaint, I guess. Page 50, no, it's still there, the nudity writer. Page 51, mostly nude creative input. I thought... Ooh, I'm missing it. There's a piece, and I guess I missed where I put it on here. But there's a piece where he doesn't just say that she gave creative input for this. She directed. Oh, it's the other one that she directed. It's the bathroom scene. All right. But what's interesting about this is, as part of the whole discussion about the nudity writer and the intimacy coordinator, he talks about that no intimacy scenes were ever shot prior to it. They did not shoot scenes without a nudity writer and it did not violate SAG-AFTRA guidelines. The only simulated nude scene filmed prior to the strike was the bathroom scene that Lively wrote, knew of, and directed the action for. And that was, I can't remember if that was filmed on the same day. What's the call sheet for the 23rd? No, it's filmed on the 23rd. It's the day after. The day after is when she films the bathroom scene. So 23rd and the 22nd, right? So the 22nd, you have the birth scene. The 23rd, you have the bathroom scene. Both of them simulated nudity or partial nudity. Both of them Lively wrote, was involved in, part of the creative. And on the 23rd, the bathroom scene, he calls out and says she directed as well. Where's that? I want to make sure I'm getting this correct. No, that's the birth scene. Romance scene. I guess it's in his, oh, we just saw it. What am I talking about? It's right here. Directed the action for. Losing it. I bring this up because the whole piece of, Baldoni's whole complaint is that Lively took over the film. On the first week of filming, right, that second week of filming, right, so within a week, on the 22nd and 23rd, he fully admits that long before Sony talked to him about the allegations that were made against him or the complaints that were made against him, before Lively had her meeting with everybody on June the 1st, before November and the 17 protections, the 22nd and the 23rd, just a couple of days into filming, Lively was writing, directing, and providing input on the scenes. So she didn't take over the movie. She was a huge part of the creative process and owned like writing and directing from the very beginning. It absolutely destroys his whole claims that she took over some movie, because that second week of filming, she apparently directed and writing, and he's using it to say, well, she never requested. He's saying that here, she didn't shoot scenes without a nudity rider. There was only one nude scene she filmed, and she didn't request a nudity rider. So which is it? Were no scenes filmed without a nudity rider, or did she film one scene with a nudity rider, but she never requested a nudity rider? Again, like I talk about, like all of his stuff is falling apart because as soon as you take a look at what he's actually saying, none of it makes sense. Anyway, I said that this gets worse. Where is this? Where am I looking at this? I think it's in his timeline, right? Maybe I'm wrong. He talks about, well, we hired a female OBGYN and she didn't have a problem with it. I'm trying to find where he said that. I don't have my notes written down here. Rough. Oh. Oh, there we go. It was right there. Okay. I found it. Okay, so he goes on to say, look, talking about Sarowitz, he ended up coming around later. Anyway, Sarowitz was there for a film scene that they filmed later in the day in which Lively's character spoke with a female OBGYN, a scene in which she was fully clothed, okay? There is no scene where she's talking with a female OBGYN. I'm assuming this scene, given his timeline, says in here that on the 22nd, the scene they shoot at the end of the day is when Lily finds out she's pregnant. This is, and I'm sorry, spoilers for It Ends With Us. She's in the hospital, in the ER room after she's attacked, and the nurse tells her they're not going to do an x-ray because she's pregnant. But this is not an OBGYN. She's not doing an examination. She's just on a bed. She's got a gown on. They just tell her this, or this is not correct. There is one other scene. All scientists says she didn't know to request a rider because you didn't disclose that you expected nudity. 100%, right? There is another scene that he might be talking about. And it is a scene a little later where Lively is examined, or I should say Lily Bloom is examined, and they do the ultrasound of her new baby. Now, one of the things I keep getting talked about is, well, it wasn't inappropriate for them to hire Adam for this scene, right? He hired his best mate. It's not that weird. It's very weird to hire your best mate for the scene in which, you know, he's between her legs. He also talked about his credentials, right? Adam's credentials, if you go look, are not his strong suit. I'm not trying to disparage his work. He's done a bunch of TV work. But when you look at his film work, he's only been in a couple of films. He's been in It Ends With Us, he's been in The Drunk, he's been in a short called The Small Ransom, and he's been in Anime Triton Force. So as I see it, he's been in 3 movies. 2 of those movies are because of his connection to Baldoni, because Baldoni also produced Anime Triton Force along with his dad. I don't know if that's going to show in here because it doesn't show the casted stuff. It shows only like production. You have to go for it. But anyway, Baldoni was like an executive producer on this, and Baldoni, there we go, Sam and Justin, producers and executive producers on Anime Triton Force. It's like I think a Chinese funded animated movie, and that's also where Adam had, you know, one of his 3 movie credits. So 2 of his 3 movie credits are because of his relationship with Baldoni. That already makes it kind of sus. But like I say, the other scene in which, you know, Lively's having her baby examined, do you want to know who plays the ultrasound technician? It's Baldoni's wife, Emily. So when he's talking about, oh, we hired, you know, Lively's sister as well, and, you know, it's the same. Yeah, Lively's sister was in a bit part cameo. Both of the hires that Baldoni brought in as personal were both involved in the pregnancy and examining the baby. Now, if you're also a fan of Okie Doki's stream and you know all about Womb World, right, this takes on a whole nother level of creepy, that essentially the other 2 people in the movie who are in the Baha'i faith with Justin are all involved in the pregnancy. Definitely disturbing. And I think it adds a whole nother level to him hiring Adam, that just, yeah, it's definitely very, very creepy. Obsessed with birthing. Yep, 100%. It's very, very strange. And so, like I say, I don't know if that will come up. I don't think it matters in the legal sense of things, but I do think it's an interesting point that, you know, he hired both his best friend and his wife to be involved in the birthing of the baby. I'm sorry about explaining well to you. No, I'm glad you did. I'm glad I finally understand Womb World and Baldoni's whole thing. It definitely helps me to see things like this that I didn't see before, because I knew that Emily was in, and I do believe I remember she played a doctor. I totally forgot until I went back and did the research for this, that I was like, oh, she plays the ultrasound technician. So yes, Womb World party time, excellent. So yes, so I just thought it was interesting that, you know, much like with the case, this is continually what we're seeing here, this kind of gaslighting. And that also happened again this week. This is where we're going to wrap up for tonight with Baldoni's new best friend, right? Harvey Weinstein, talking about, he came out and issued a statement in an interview talking about, you know, he feels the same way that the New York Times cherry-picked the details about him. And that, you know, basically the New York Times did exactly to him to what they did to Baldoni. Watching Baldoni's legal action against the New York Times and its reporters, accusing them of manipulating communications and ignoring evidence that countered Lively's claims, hit me hard. It brought back everything I experienced when the Times reported on me. They did the same thing. They cherry-picked what fit their story and ignored critical context and facts that challenged the narrative. Now, this is not necessarily him endorsing Baldoni, but it is him drawing that parallel of Baldoni's story of being falsely accused mirrors my story, where I've definitely been falsely accused as well. Now, I say that this is like bringing up the gaslighting, right? First part is that New York Times came back and said, look, when we made the story about Harvey, he initially said, you know, a statement to basically apologize and say, I appreciate the way I behaved with my colleagues in the past has caused pain. I apologize for it. I'm trying to do better. I've got a long way to go. Not anywhere near enough based off the pain and damage that man has caused, but it was an admission of mistakes and stuff that he made. He was not saying it was all made up. Now, of course, he's changed his narrative. The interesting thing about all of this is that, you know, we have been saying, all of these people who've been defending Baldoni have been doing so from a position of essentially making it harder for victims to come forward, discrediting the entire Me Too movement. And a lot of the creators, right? Melanie King, when this came out, and was like, hey, look, the New York Times also falsely smeared him just like they did Baldoni. I think he might be right. I never thought I would say this, but once you learn the details, you might agree, right? We also have talked before about Candace Owens. She made a whole thing of like, I'm going after Harvey Weinstein next after defending Baldoni. I'm going to do it. And, there's this whole story from Harvey Weinstein where he's talking about he believes that Candace Owens will help exonerate him of the claims from 90 women of misconduct and assault. Like, we have talked about how this whole thing, right, with Baldoni has been about discrediting the entire platform for all victims. And yet, when this story came out, a bunch of the creators that are talking about it for Baldoni have then tried to come out and say, well, Harvey actually supports Blake Lively because he said he'd never had a bad interaction, or he said he'd always had nothing but warmth and kindness from Ryan and Lively, and like, see, Harvey Weinstein supports him. And it's this continued like flipping of the narrative and gaslighting. In particular, I'm going to call this out. Just plain Zach was talking about it on threads with some of my mutuals, and talking about how, oh, I've got receipts, and he made these comments about like, but just 20 hours before, just yesterday, he'd made an entire video where he was calling out Harvey Weinstein and saying, you need to shut up because you're ruining it for everybody. You are screwing things up for Justin Baldoni. So like, they are 1 minute accepting that they know where this is going, right? That Harvey Weinstein speaking up like this is not beneficial for Justin Baldoni. Him comparing himself to Justin Baldoni's situation, they know is not good for Justin. They know that the reason he's doing it is because, by taking Justin's case, we can use Justin's case to invalidate all of the claims that all victims make. And then immediately trying to flip it once they see that where this is going, where Harvey jumps on to the narrative they have created, right? By promoting folks like Candace Owens and like Melanie King, to then going to where like, oh wait, those people actually think we're on their side? Yeah, because you've spent months defending them. You've spent months discrediting the platform used to actually lift up victims and believe their stories. And now you want to act like, oh no, actually I believe victims. No. It's absolute madness. And I have been so frustrated this week by the absolute abhorrent and really obvious way in which they just kind of immediately tried to twist this round to then use Harvey Weinstein and connect it to Blake Lively and like attack her for her association for him, when Harvey himself is talking about how great it is that Candace Owens is digging into his case, how great it is that Baldoni is also undermining the credibility of the New York Times because it helps his case. It is absolutely maddening, infuriating, and frustrating, and especially from somebody who had the platform that Baldoni had and claimed to believe the things that he believed. So yes, it's been a lot of that. There's been some good sides to it, right? Though, of, seeing the victories that we got this week of, Baldoni being denied that chance to extend his deadlines and get more discovery, and knowing that Monday deadline's coming basically for him to back up his claims that he's been saying for 4 months. So it's going to be an interesting day on Monday to see. Like I said, didn't get time to the Jones stuff. I will try and do something Sunday. I don't know what time yet. It'll probably have to be Sunday afternoon stream, something like that, because I do think it's worth going through those and taking the time to go through those motions dismissed. They are hilarious. If you've not read them, just go look at them and go read the introductions because they're hilarious. All right, I will quickly check in with chats. So that's how Candace got wrapped up in this. Yes, Candace got involved in this because it was an opportunity for her to jump on Me Too. And a bunch of the same people who, were very involved in the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp case have now become involved in this for the same reasons. I don't want to mention their names because I don't want to give them the clout or the call out. But I mean, if you go on Twitter, you know who they are. And they're all involved in the same case for the same reasons. Weird how they just gloss over the false part though. Weinstein is in jail because of evidence. Yeah. But he was 90. And this is the thing that gets me. This is the old. I can't remember who it is that said it, but like what's it? 90 women call Harvey Weinstein a predator and nobody believes them, but you know, Harvey can call 90 women liars and everybody believes him. So, you know, it's crazy. Um, I never cared. Mousy says, I never cared about celebs, but understanding what's happening here is so important for every victim of sexual assault, harassment, and abuse. Same, right? I do like celebrity and pop culture kind of stuff. I'm a big 90 Day fan. I don't necessarily get too deep into it, but I love like a lot of the snark and the kind of gossip stuff. Um, don't really kind of get normally involved in, especially to this level. But this has been such an important, I think, topic of conversation to get involved in because of the implications, because of there's so much of this that is centered around what my core content is about, like anti-misogyny, red pill content, all of that. And I don't think any of us were really prepared for how much backlash we would see coming from that wave of anti-misogyny and from those red pill creators getting involved in this and just sort of dogpiling on, right? Not just Blake Lively. Anybody who speaks up and supports her, any of my mutuals who make content on this, you look at their comment sections, they're ratioed. There's all of these accounts that have like only been just created. They don't have, you know, any content themselves. They have a couple of comments to their names and they've got a lot of things to say and they're just on threads all day just talking about this one topic, right? It's very clearly manufactured, and I don't necessarily mean that in a Jed Wallace bot farm kind of way, but I do mean it in a, I think a lot of the accounts are, you know, not who they say they are, and they are just a lot of misogynistic red pill content creators creating an endless stream of these throwaway sock puppets that they're using to just go harass people on the internet. And I think it just shows how much of our laws haven't caught up to that to be able to actually go after that abuse and harassment in any reasonable fashion, unfortunately. So this is where we are. Oh well. Let's see what else. Just read about Weinstein saying they are cherry picking stories to make Baldoni look bad like they did to him. If cherry picking can look that bad, then what are his lines of is, right? It's not a great admission. If you're saying it's cherry picked, what's the rest? If 90 is just the cherry picked, where are the 300 other people? They flagged bringing up Weinstein to use against Lively in the smear campaign. Yes, all scientists, right? By connecting her to Leslie Sloan, because I think Weinstein invested in her PR firm or something like that, and then that has now gradually been twisted to, you know, she represented Weinstein and that Blake Lively supported Weinstein and all of this. It gets constantly twisted, and like this is that entire gaslighting that's going on where they just make up these stories, nobody fact checks, nobody cares about what the actual truth is, and these rumors just get propagated and spread around the internet, unfortunately. Dave Neal tried to get Taylor Lawrence to note that he's a progressive in her article about the way the right-wing review is used in this case to draw people in the pipeline. They got to realize their actions. Yeah, my lady, and oh, man, that's a whole nother topic for another time, because I noticed that Dave Neal trying to position himself in that way, which I'm not sure I agree, but trying to position himself that way definitely caused some tension with other creators, again, whose names I don't want to bring up or mention, entirely because of that. And I had called out a while back, made a whole video about how a lot of the people talking on this topic are on that end of the political spectrum, and that this is a political discussion. This is nothing to do with Blake Lively, has nothing to do with Justin Baldoni, has nothing to do with Events with Us. This is a political discussion by certain people with certain political viewpoints. And they kind of proved that out, because the moment that kind of Dave Neal tried to distance himself and inject that in there, he suddenly became persona non grata with those same people. So it just shows how the problem with that is they get this ever shrinking circle of true believers, and I guess Dave is no longer part of the group. So Heidi calls out brave women are speaking up. They are the heroes, 100%. You know, I think when all of the dust settles this, there will be a lot of discussion about, you know, how important it was to go through this and to endure the harassment because of how important this is for other victims. And again, like we've talked about before, if Blake Lively has to go through this, what's it like for anybody else? I'm trying to skip through because I want to try to wrap up. It's so interesting. Sylvain says, thank you, you're doing important work. No, I'm doing entertainment, but I'm glad that, you know, we can sort of provide community, hope, optimism, and some entertainment at the same time. And if it helps people feel validated and heard, then fantastic stuff. Thanks for covering this. I try to capture as much as I can. It's been a busy week, and it's important for all victims. Yes, and like I say, I didn't catch all of it. We've got more to catch, so I will try and get that done. It was just a lot this week, and like I say, next week is going to be good. Riley, thanks for the stream. Watch the playback. I don't know whether paving the way for this discourse, but paying attention to it is so important. I do think so again. And it's hard, right? Because right now there are so many other really important conversations to be having that this almost feels unimportant, right? And I don't want to say that word because it's not unimportant, but like there's a lot going on right now. We are in, a total collapse of democracy. And we're staying on this, but I feel it's important because I have so many of my mutuals who are staying on those other stories that are important. I don't see too many people staying on this, and so that is why I have clung onto this and not let go, because it's very personal for me, and I think it's important. So, all right, stream's great, thank you. They said Dave Neal had a crush on Taylor, right? I think this is what they also said about Blake Lively, right? This is their whole thing of every time they're just attracted. Case is bigger than two celebrities, and I think Blake knows that. I do think so too. I think Ezra Hudson in particular, the main lawyer who's been writing a lot of the motions and stuff, I think she really understands that, and her writing has been really good, really tapping into some of that and building that broader narrative at it that I think has been helpful for some of us to see that this is representing all victims, not just Blake Lively. So grateful for it. You and lots of other pro-victim creators are making me feel sane. I'm glad, Alexander. And if there's anything more I can do, if there's any content that I can make, because I have kind of like taken a break from it on the TikTok side. If there's stuff you want to see, drop it in the comments, let me know. Dave Neal does the same thing as Kirsty Flack, commenting about how fair they are trying to be and saying horrid stuff. I will be the first to say, like, I'm not fair. I'm not going to. There are certain viewpoints and other pieces on the other side I'm just not going to engage with. I think this whole fair and balanced thing is terrible. And I think a lot of people who try to present that are the same people who put on their dating profile that they are centrists or moderates. You know what I mean? Like, it's that same scam, I feel. We see your neurospice in the sixth patriarch. Most of us are there with you. All right, busted. I maintain that Duncan and Baldoni and Freeman is both entertaining and important work. I agree. And with that, I think that's where we'll end it up. As always, if you like what we're doing here, like, comment, subscribe. Oh, you know what I totally forgot to do, chat? Before you leave, chat, as a reward for all of you sticking through 2.5 hours, almost 2 3/4 hours, I'm going to gift 5 memberships to the channel. So we're going to go do that right now. So 3, 2, 1, launch. Boom. I have no idea who gets them. It's all completely random. So there we go. Melissa Jane, KRR, Spazant Sungi. Yep, the other Karen and Vicky. Congratulations. Memberships to the channel. Fantastic. Awesome. All right, with that, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I know it was a long one tonight. I told you we got a lot. I think it's really important. I also think it's been kind of a good week in terms of the stuff that we're seeing. Monday's going to be important, right? We're going to see what happens with those interrogatories, and also next week with the amended complaint. So going to still be a busy week next week. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Thanks so much for hanging out. If you like what we're doing, like, comment, subscribe to the channel, because it'll help you get seen by other people. And in the meantime, you know where to find me. If there's anything else I can do, or if there's other comments or content that I can produce, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all when we do this again, hopefully Sunday afternoon, if not next week. Appreciate you. Have a great evening.